before starting, I want to give out some thank yous as well to all the department head team, the assistants, and of course the finance staff. Tony and Del put a lot of work in putting together this document for our review today. So for today's meeting, we're going to go over the 2020 annual budget overview, including key policy initiatives along with the tax levy. We'll review the capital plan and then dive into the department presentations, starting off with police and fire, and then public affairs in the village manager's office, and then I'll be back for the finance department, and then public works, community development, business district revitalization, and finally water and electric. Going forward, we have future meetings on November 5th and November 12th. Those are follow-up meetings if necessary, depending on how far we get today. And then finally a public hearing on November 19th. And then on December 3rd, consideration for final approval of the budget. And it should be noted that the village is in full compliance with truth and taxation requirements of 35 ILCS 200/18-55, and the deadline to file the village's 2019 tax levy is December 20th, 2019. In regards to the document itself, it's an extensive document, 523 pages. The document you have before you is the exact same document that's presented online to the public. It goes into a lot of detail, and because of the preparation of that document, we've been able to win the GFOA Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. Including your budget document on the first flap of the capital plan, there's a separate capital improvement plan with a detailed project listing, kind of like a one-page capital. It'll list every project on the capital side. User-friendly, searchable PDF for the web. It should load fast, make it easy for the public, and finally it was posted on October 25th. For summary of budget and financial policies, the budget is balanced, and that operating expenditures are fully funded by operating revenues. So annual recurring expenditures are funded by annual recurring revenue. We don't rely on fund balance or one-time revenue sources to fund routine recurring operating expenses. Our ideal revenues are those that are stable and predictable and grow along with the costs. We are home rule, but we act like a non-home rule for the tax levy. In fact, we'll go into a slide that demonstrates we're actually far ahead of non-home rule tax caps. Fees are set to recover the cost of service, and utility rates are set using a cost of service analysis. Operating expense increases are generally and should generally be equal to revenue increases. Personnel expenses should be fair and in line with neighboring communities, and a commitment to making 100% of the actuarial recommended contribution for public safety pensions. Capital is largely funded on a pay-as-you-go basis wherever possible. Debt policy, the village has consistently retained a AAA bond rating from Moody's with a stable outlook. And this was actually reaffirmed this past January, our AAA rating. So Moody's took another look and they reaffirmed AAA with a stable outlook. Budget amendments, the village has avoided budget amendments where possible, and we include a contingency in the budget. In fund balance, net asset policy, there's minimum end-of-year fund balance targets that are set for each fund. The 2020 budget proposes a flat property tax levy, a 0% increase for existing residents for the 6th year in a row, and captures 1.405% in new growth. And we'll dive deeper on the tax levy in a few slides. Salaries and benefits, settled union contracts, are plugging in a 2.5% COLA increase. IPVC for health insurance, our PPO, which is our most popular plan, is a 0.9% increase for 2020. That's what we're budgeting. And IMRF, the rate increase has gone from 11.75% to 14.05%. That's the village's contribution percentage. And we're funding public safety pensions per the actuarial study, 100% funding at December 31st, 2035, which is an increase of 10.5% in 2020. Moving on to stormwater, the 2020 capital budget has $7.53 million plugged in for stormwater projects, funding the phase 1 of the county project, with an estimated future unfunded capital of $44.64 million. Detailed financing strategies will be a big discussion point in 2020. For the Business District Revitalization Fund, 2020 capital budget of $1.36 million, and with funding utilizing a $1.1 million property tax levy and $550,000 transfer from the general fund. And this will be further discussed as part of the community development presentation. For sanitary sewer, the 2020 budget, capital budget is $400,000. And we recently did an inflow and infiltration survey, which identified $3.3 million in rehabilitation projects. And we plugged in the high and medium critical repairs into the 5-year capital plan. And the total 5-year CIP is $2.15 million, which is fully funded on a pay-as-you-go basis. Furthermore, on utility funding, we implement rate recommendations outlined in the electric rate study. The rate increase for 2020 is 2.2% for the residential portion. We're implementing rate recommendations outlined in the water rate study, a rate increase for 2020 of 8.5%. Sanitary sewer fund rate increase for 2020 is 5%. Again, the plan is fully funded on a pay-as-you-go basis. And refuse fund is fully funded via user charges. We're no longer utilizing property taxes to fund that, and will be discussed as part of the Public Works presentation. The 2020 budget addresses aging infrastructure to the tune of $7.3 million, with $3.19 million towards the electric plant and power grid, $3.37 million in roadway, sidewalk, bridges, and parking lots, $1.34 million in water main renewal in conjunction with the Public Works annual road program, and a total 5-year capital investment of $108,725,679. In 2020, the capital plan totals $18.5 million. For the annual budget impact to a typical Winneton, we have that pegged at $158, with increases in the electric, water, and sanitary sewer, and then other fees held flat, and then the village property taxes tweaking down slightly. That's assuming if you had a $25,000 tax bill. The budget is balanced, as I stated previously, and we define a balanced budget with operating expenditures, your routine recurring operating expenditures funded by operating revenues. So this slide is attempting to demonstrate that, showing a total operating revenues of $71.8 million over operating expenditures of $60.5 million, leaving net operating income $11.28 million, which is getting fully dedicated towards this year's capital program of $18.5 million. Moving on to the general fund, 2020 total general fund revenues are $26.4 million, up 2.21%. The drivers to this is the tax levy, which captures the new growth only. That new growth portion is $208,000. Budgeting a decrease in permit revenue of $325,000, largely driven the last year we had permit revenue from the One Winnetka project. That's no longer budgeted this year. Intergovernmental revenue of $215,000, that's sales tax, income tax, that type of thing. Charges for service, $109,642. Payment in lieu of taxes, $182,951. And then transfer in, this is the water fund loan principal of $250,000. And then a reduction of BMO global interest earnings of almost $100,000 due to decreasing interest rates. The 2020 general fund operating expenditures total $24.1 million, or an increase of 1.84%. And this chart shows the increase across the various departments. In terms of transfers to other funds, the transfer of $550,000 from the general fund to the business district revitalization. And moving on to property taxes. So we start off showing the allocation of property taxes paid in 2018. And this shows that the village portion totals 12.61% of the property tax levy, of the total property tax bill for a resident, with the majority going to the Winnetka Public Schools and the New Trier High School. So in total, they get about 65% of the tax bill, And then the village portion is this sliver in the middle, the 12.61. This is actually down from the previous year, which was 12.67%. So the share of the village portion of the share of the property tax pie is, decreasing over time. In regards to the property tax extension limitation law, the proposed budget surpasses the 2005 home rule pledge for tax levy and it adheres and actually exceeds the PTEL tax cap. So in 2005, when the village went home rule, there was a commitment made that the village would continue to act like a non-home rule for purposes of the property tax levy. And the village has consistently exceeded that target. So the 2019 proposed tax levy is $15,047,473. And this 2019 levy is a total of a little over $2 million less than the PTEL limit. It's less than the tax cap. So cumulatively, since the tax cap, since we went home rule, the village has been $10.3 million under the tax cap since 2005. So if we were a non-home rule community, and many non-home rule communities and taxing districts levy right up to that tax cap, it's a method of balloon, they call it balloon levying. Had the village taken that practice, we would have, levied a total of $10.3 million more since 2005. Yeah, CPI or 5%, whichever's less. So the existing taxpayer increase is 0%, because the tax levy only captures new growth for the 6th year in a row. New development totals 1.405%, which provides an additional $208,488 in new revenue. And over 100% of this amount of the increased revenue resulting from the property tax levy is going to go towards public safety pension funding. The 2019 property tax levy will be set in December 2019 in conjunction with the approval of the budget. Okay, so this slide shows a comparison between 1997 and 2018 tax years. And what we're trying to show here, we looked at what the inflation factor was, the CPI, since that time, and that's down here in this corner, the 55.6%. So CPI, since 1997, prices have gone up 55.6%. And then the total tax levy across all taxing districts has gone up 77%, ahead of the CPI rate. And then the villages has been only at 29.5%. So the tax levy increase since 1997 has actually been less than the CPI. Moving on to the capital plan. The capital improvement plan is shown in a separate document. That's the small binder. CIP is broken out by fund with cash flow shown for each fund. We include a detailed project sheet for each item, and to get into the capital plan, it has to be at least a $50,000 project. And again, in your front pocket, there's a detailed project listing. So if you want to see the CIP on one page, so to speak, it's actually 2 pages, but there's a nice summary right in the front page. This chart shows our capital spending over the 5-year period. In 2020, we have $18.5 million. This goes up to about almost $24 million in 2021 and 2022. And then the last couple of years, it drops back down to about $21.3 million. Key drivers of the 5-year capital plan is the stormwater, $60.7 million, which represents about 56% of the total plan. The electric plant and the power grid, $16.3 million. $14.2 million dedicated to street reconstruction. And the water plant and the water main distribution system, $9.2 million, or 8.5%. And the sanitary sewer, $1.675 million, or 1.5%. For 2020, significant capital initiatives include in the general fund, $2.49 million. Dedicated towards building improvements, vehicles and equipment, and largely, almost predominantly, road, sidewalk, and parking improvements. For the motor fuel tax, we have $1.3 million in total projects lined up. And the facilities fund, $65,000. And then in the downtown revitalization fund, we have almost $1.4 million, $50,000 towards sidewalk, grades and power, or sidewalks and grades. Spruce and Chestnut streetscape, $100,000 going towards there. Elm and Green Bay and Chestnut, that's the big project for like next year, a little over $1 million. And then other capital of $195,000. For the electric fund, we have $3.2 million plugged in for 2020 capital initiatives. Water fund, almost $2 million, with $1.9 million going towards water system improvements. That's mostly water main. And in the refuse fund, we have $265,000 dedicated towards the refuse containers. And again, sanitary sewer, $400,000. And finally, stormwater, $7.5 million. So concluding, the 2020 annual budget is fiscally sound, with operating budgets are balanced, while maintaining appropriate reserves and adequate staffing. It provides for core village services and continues to modernize and invest in village infrastructure. We anticipate post-budget major policy discussion around stormwater funding, so that's the big financing discussion that will be coming. That concludes the opening remarks. We'll turn it over to the police department.
Are we allowed to ask questions? Okay, so I have a big policy question that is brought up by this, and you know, first of all, I think that the budget's amazing, and everybody here has done a great job, and I think that, again, you know, village staff has outperformed every expectation, and I don't really have any other issues with the budget, except that I do think that by adhering so severely to our policy of not raising taxes for residents, we're creating what could be a very scary prospect for residents in terms of the commitment to get to 100% funding of pension funds in 13 years, just all of a sudden. And when you look at what everyone has done, everyone has cut staffs to where we're just basic and we're holding steady, and that is very commendable. But even with that, you know, salaries and stuff have gone up, and pension owings have gone up over time. And so without really dedicating a new tax, although you're taxing new residents, we're seeing, you know, ballooning of our the actual number of owings. So we go from, you know, 2010 we had a $10 million gap to 2018 we have a almost $16 million gap in the funding levels. And so while as a percent we're still around the same, and it is important to note that we are around the same. I'm just looking at the police pension fund right now. I think that we should be funding this more fully. I'm worried that by not taking the tax increases in previous years, we miss the opportunity to have more tax revenues dedicated just to the pension funds and as a way to segregate it, not to increase other spending, and that we're not getting the benefit of those funds having grown over time as they would have been, right? Money that we had gotten earlier 10 years ago would have been worth more today, right? So that gap would have been less. And I think we're foolish to hold the line on, you know, suggesting a tax increase, because I think we do need to make real contribution. I'm uncomfortable with the projections, the return estimates, especially uncomfortable looking 5 years out and knowing that there will be a recession or some kind of, you know, bad investment years that face us, because we've had some ample time. So I'm concerned about it. I think that we should be proposing a tax increase for residents. I think if we can do something smaller now, it alleviates having to do something grander later. I think we're balancing the budget off the back of the pensions, and it makes me uncomfortable. So, and I know that's general practice in Illinois, and I know we're not the most egregious player, but I still think that we need to think about a fair, small increase to get us inching that way.
Yes.
Well, I think the pension topic was going to come up today in some form or fashion. Just a couple of, obviously, it's a topic being debated down in Springfield right now, and in all likelihood, we're going to be impacted by that in some way. It's good to have the fire chief and police chief here because they need to understand too that this is going on, and that I think what's going on in Springfield will likely impact a policy discussion. One reason, and we're 62, 65% is, again, because our assumptions are very conservative. If we took the assumptions of some of our neighboring communities, we'd probably be, Tim, 70+% funded.
Easy, yeah.
So, this is, you can move numbers around. We think it's conservative. I think we will get there by 2035 if we decide that we want to at this point. I mean, some of the debate and, the concerns that we've sort of discussed amongst ourselves based on this proposed reform is what it might do potentially to subject our funds, our police and fire funds, to any kind of cross-subsidy of other communities in the state, whether the language within this reform will protect it from any state access. That is a concern that I have, and I know other people around the table have, and frankly, I think that our public safety employees should have that concern as well. And so, we are, at least since I've been involved here, 100% committed to making these funds as bulletproof and at the highest integrity as possible. And, I don't necessarily think this is a good reform proposal for Winnetka, because we're on the path to get them fully funded. We're on the path so that our retired public safety employees and our current public safety employees will know that those funds are there. But as you well know, you move into a state pool of some sort, and you devil in the details on that, and that's concerning. And it might be that we actually, when it becomes part of the IMRF model, which by the way has a 7.25% funding assumption, we might say let's go to 7.25% and be in line with that model, and all of a sudden, all of a sudden we're 75% funded, and our commitment annually would be lessened. Do I think that's a good thing? I don't necessarily think that's a good thing, but this whole issue, I think, is on a path to a robust policy discussion here.
I totally agree with that.
So
I totally agree. I don't think that I'm necessarily right, and I know all of the different, I don't know all of them. I know there are many different accounting games that are happening that underlie, and I know that we're being conservative, and I know that we're well managed on all that. But, and I know there are games being played in Springfield, right? And that we're sensitive to our own funds and our own fiscal discipline, being for naught, right? If they override and
Right.
scoop out our funds. But that said, I do think that we've made a commitment to the pensions, and just because everyone else in Illinois is a worse actor than we are, we're tall among dwarfs, right? I think it's right, because nobody's actually funding the commitments the way that they ought to be funded. And unless we can go bankrupt, which, we can in this state, there's no way, and we wouldn't want to, because these are obligations that we've made
Yeah.
in trust to our, public employees. So I just, I think it's a gentler awakening to do a slow tax increase rather than to get to year 13 and be like, okay, 10% increase or whatever the maximum is. So, when I look at back and all those amazing numbers about 10 million that we saved, and I apply them to where we could be on the pension stuff, those are $10 million that we could have put into the pension funds that, we chose not to take that. So I'm just saying, policy question,
Yep.
let's do a little bit, or next year you can do a little bit, but, maybe there's some room to explain to our fellow village residents about the problem and think about moving gradually instead of making bold, quick moves that would be disruptive to people and upsetting.
And just to clarify on the tax levy, it's set based on the actuarial recommendation, and the actuary prepares its study. So the state has the goal of the 90% funded by 2040, and the actuarial study assumes 100% funded by 2035. So kind of by definition, the levy we're putting together, I mean, is in, greater than what the statutory minimum requirements are. And we're committed to levying that full amount of the
We are on
actuarial.
the path to funding this.
Hash it out now.
Yeah, I mean,
Brought it up, now it's time to talk about it.
I mean, I think we're on the path, but I think the conversation, once this reform is passed, I think that's when we have to decide how we want to play in that world going forward.
So maybe it's a wait until the state does their legislation.
I think it is at the moment.
So we can see what, and that's an okay answer to me, is to say. Right, we can't, and if we
Yeah,
go
no.
ahead, then we may unnecessarily penalize ourselves.
Right.
Good fault.
That's been my big
Yeah.
worry.
Yeah.
is that This just seems to be one of those issues where you don't want to be too far out in front of the pack, because if there is some leveling or subsidizing, obviously, the people that are further ahead are the ones that are going to suffer in that equation for the people that are further behind. And, we're going to fight like hell not, to have a segregated, maintain the segregated account and the segregated accounting of our policies. But who the hell knows what goes on with the accounting, right? And it'll show up on a bill on a Wednesday morning, and by Thursday afternoon, it's a law. So, but,
All right, I'm comfortable, I raised it for the record.
Yep, sure, sure.
oh, we're going to have a lively discussion.
Well,
think we're ready.
I think that's to come, yeah. Can I ask a question on the general fund?
Sure.
Just to understand, so in 2018, we had a good surplus. In 2019, we're expected to have a surplus in the general fund. Now, it looks to me like we're going to have expenses, general fund expenses of about $1.1 million to $1.2 million less than budget. And I guess my question, Tim, and I don't have the 2019 numbers in front of me, but what's driving that reduced expenses? Is it capital? Is it operating? What is it that is leading to the $1
Yeah,
million
it's,
plus?
mostly it's capital, but also in terms of how we did in actual performance, there was some operating for the actual in 2018. When we talked about the audit, there was some salary savings as well due to,
So is it capital that is permanently deferred or whatever, or is it capital that is now moved into 2020?
I would say both. I would have to take a look, but some of it is moving to 2020. There were some projects that didn't get done as part of the IPA loan. We had the project lined up, that's getting moved forward
Okay.
into 2020. And then there's some stuff that just simply,
And so from an operating, if we just looked at operating for the general fund, we were pretty much in line with budget? Is that,
there was still some operating savings, and again, largely driven, I would say, by salaries and benefits to a changing workforce.
okay.
And what we're seeing there. So there's definitely some operating savings, and then, staff holding the line on their budgets as well.
The only thing I would point out, and I do like the graphic, and I think it's important to note the 5-year sort of cost to a resident, because just looking at the property taxes doesn't take into account, the water, everything else that
Yeah.
we're getting at. The 97 to current numbers also don't take that into account.
Correct.
Other costs
Correct.
that residents are paying. So, someday, if you probably don't even have the records going way back then. Maybe you do for water.
I think we could probably find them.
Et cetera, but that's not an all-in cost to residents, but it is impressive that, from a tax standpoint, we're
Yeah.
half the CPI.
Yeah, no, I think so.
The other thing I want to point out too is that calculation, this $158, it always gets penalized by the fact that we have our own, if you're doing a comparative analysis, right? That we are always penalized which gets factored into that $158. There's no other community up here on the North Shore that has to account for Commonwealth Edison increases, which are usually.
That's right.
So I don't like that comparison only because of that we're being unduly burdened by, things that are actually a benefit to the community in this financial analysis that I think skew it the other way. I've been trying to talk Rob into taking those things out, but he's being very stubborn on this issue and keeps it in, so.
What, taking
Well, I mean,
the electric and water
Well, I
increases
mean,
out?
cleaning it up so that it becomes something that's a little bit more effective as a comparative tool.
Well, I'd compare it just to what I'm paying year to year. I mean, I don't really care about Glencoe, Wilmette, and so on that front. I mean, I think that this chart that shows everything that a resident is paying, because we can't just say, you know, your property taxes have stayed level, so your cost of living in Winnetka stayed level. I mean, we know that's not the case, but we can show that it's, you know, 2% annualized over the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, I think that's fairly impressive.
Yeah, I think the transparency of our village administration is what creates trust in our community. And there's no higher value than that, and I don't think that I think people are smart enough to figure out that if they live in Wilmette, it would be a ComEd bill that they're looking at. And I know that transparency creates trust, and so I.
It's not,
Right.
and the argument isn't to be less transparent, the argument is to be more accurate in
No, I know what you're saying.
explaining the number so that people understand, because, and I don't even know what amount of that 158 is electrical increases. I mean, but at the same time,
60%, 60 to 70%,
up that increase,
$93.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
But we can write a note.
Water's
to residents
93, water's 93, electric is 60. So whoever's here representing water and electric today has some explaining to do.
It'll be-
You're not a burden, Brian, you're back.
We're all exhausted. The other point that you don't show here, Tim, that really, I mean, you know, you walk around town, and I love talking about it to the detriment of our other taxing bodies, is that, you know, if you look historically what the percentage of the village spend was of the property tax over time. I mean, I don't know, we were 20% 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, and today we're 12.5%.
Mhm.
There's some other,
Well, that's a whole different.
but
The
that's a,
denominator has changed.
that is yes, it has. Yeah, it's a big issue though, so, I think we're doing pretty well.
Anything else?
Yeah, it's a great job, Tim.
Thank you.
Tim.
Great job.
Thank you, appreciate it.
So what section are we in here? I know, but is this one easier?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but my notes are in the other one. So what page are we on here?
Just start with the police department.
Section 6? Yes. Tab 6.
Good morning, President Rintz, Council. So putting the budget together truly is a team effort. It's a collaborative effort. And with me today, I have two very key members of our senior staff. I've got our Administrative Services Manager, Carrie Kaup, in the back, and I've got our Deputy Chief of Police, Brian O'Connell. And I just want to take a second to recognize the effort and the work that both Carrie and Brian put into this budget. They just did a great job, did a lot of the heavy lifting, and I'm just really proud to work with them day in and day out. They really are great assets to the village. So if we take a look at the organizational chart for the police department here, there's very little change from previous years. We have 35 and a half full-time equivalents within the organization. There's been no change on the sworn side of the house with respect to structure. You may recall in the last 12 months, we had made some changes on the civilian side of the house, specifically the records division, where we had converted a analyst position to an administrative services manager position, which provided oversight, or provides oversight and supervision to records currently. When we made that change, the advantage has been we were able to provide more structure to this unit and more oversight, and as such, we created some efficiencies. Previously, we had 2 part-time record specialists, and with the improvements that we made in this area, we were able to recognize we no longer needed 2 part-timers, and we reduced that to 1. Conversely, we identified a need in the organization under our part-time community service officers over here. We were able to take the 1 part-time record specialist position, convert that into a part-time community service officer position on the other side of the org chart. Other than that, those are the only changes that we've made. If we take a look at accomplishments for 2019, council may recall that in 2017 we consolidated our dispatch center with Glenview Public Safety Dispatch. That left us with considerable work to be done with respect to repurposing the building. Specifically, our 911 center was vacant. And we successfully completed phase 1 of our project. And if you look in the lower right-hand corner down here, this is what our dispatch center looks like now, which is now our new investigations office. This is really a state-of-the-art office that our detectives have to work in. Technology, new monitors, ability to work on cases in a real efficient manner. We're real proud of it. And we got that done earlier this year. Council also may recall on October 1st of this year through Resolution 76, there was authorization to select, award a contract to complete phases 2 and 3 for the remainder of our building improvements. This is a capital expenditure of $70,000 for this year. Last couple of years, you probably have heard us talk a bit about electronic e-ticketing, electronic citation issuance. It's finally come to fruition. We had identified and selected a vendor. We have rolled this out. We've got about half of our patrol officers trained at this point, and by the end of the year we should have everybody trained. And the exciting part about that too is that we were able to do this for, we came in under $10,000 under budget in getting this initiative accomplished. First ever reciprocal reporting agreement with District 36. I'm really happy about this because when we talk about exchange of information and communication with our schools, it's more important now than ever to be able to do that. We've had one with New Trier in the past that we refreshed year before last, and then this year was the first time we got one done with 36, and we're very pleased with this. And then last, another technology improvement is we implemented our Smart 911 program along with the new Rave Alert system. And this is enhanced, these are 2 new enhancements that we have, improvements to these systems. And this was also a savings. Our old Code Red system, we were paying $3,000. We budgeted $3,000 annually. This was actually reduced to $1,650 with the new Smart 911 and Rave Alert system. If we take a look ahead to 2020 for next year, we will be completing phase 3 of our public safety repurposing. This is building out a equipment room, patrol equipment room. It is renovating a supervisor's office and creating a office for our part-time social worker. We hope to have this completed in the early part of next year. Another objective that we have is also technology-based. It's to develop a platform to share real-time crime data with the public. And we were able to get this at an annual cost of $2,150. The reason why we were able to get it for so cheap is it's part of our, we're getting it through our dispatch consortium with Glenview. So that'll be a nice program that we'll be able to roll out next year. Piggybacking on e-ticketing is our electronic crash reporting. This is something that we've already selected the vendor. We've already are getting ready to begin testing on this, and we will have this ready to roll beginning of the year as well. This will be $2,700, I'm sorry, $2,500 annually, that's correct, yeah, moving forward. Another initiative that we are excited about for next year is this establishing a business liaison officer specialty assignment. This is not creating a new position in the police department as far as adding an extra body. What this is taking or identifying one or two officers that in addition to their regular duties, they're going to become liaisons with our business community. What I like about this is they're going to have an opportunity to get face-to-face with some of the business owners, be able to provide them with crime alerts that come up in the North Shore in a timely manner. The business owners could have a point of contact that they know that they could go to, as opposed to maybe just calling the police department blindly and looking for an answer from somebody. They'd have a name and a face to put this to. So we're going to roll this out next year. Next year, our entry-level police officer list expires. So we're going to be partnering with Human Resources to conduct a new test and establish a new list. And then finally, this is always going to be, and you're going to see this every year, it's always a primary goal of ours to reinforce our crime prevention and community relations efforts. So when we look at the budget as a whole, we're coming in at just over $7.9 million. 3% increase, and this is exclusively due to personnel costs. And I know you haven't seen it yet, but you will on November 5th. You've got the MAP contract that'll be on the agenda there. So this number here takes that into account for that contract, which you'll see on the 5th. For the third year in a row, we were able to reduce our supplies and services budget here by 1.55%. Our dispatch contract, we're entering year 4 of 7 in our consolidation contract here. That's a fixed increase that we know about, we can anticipate each year. And again, this is attributed to personnel costs as well. Finally, our HVAC system is 23 years old. And we've had to make quite a few repairs to the system this year. It's nearing its end of life. We did have to increase that transaction line by $8,000 for next year just to anticipate more repairs. It is an item that we've moved up on our scheduling for replacement on our capital plan due to the increased repairs that we're having to conduct with it. And those conclude my prepared comments. With that, I'll be happy to entertain any comments or questions that you might have.
It is next year.
We have it in there for $250,000 right now. Yeah, for 2021. Yeah, early returns on that, quite honestly, that's on the low end of it. I mean, that's probably we have 5 rooftop units in the public safety building on the police side. Yeah, 5. And that's probably going to get us RTs only. It's surprisingly big. Yeah. The range has its own space, and then we've got servers down in the basement that have their own space down there, and
Big bays. So Mark, on on your vehicle replacement, since they're under the 50,000, whatever, you have two squad cars. Is this just what you have in here for this coming year? Is that just a general rotation? Is there anything new and different about your equipment that you're purchasing that's not within capital?
so with the vehicle replacement, we typically will do 3 cars a year. We were able to get it down to 2 cars for this upcoming year. We go about 75,000 miles, 6 years on our Mark Patrol vehicles. Staff cars go about 90,000. You have to, keeping in mind with these vehicles, it's not like a traditional passenger car that you drive, and these cars are idling for hours at a time, particularly in inclement weather, running sometimes 24 hours a day.
And do you have is there like a spreadsheet that shows
Yes.
all the equipment and when they're running off and useful life and so on, and this is in keeping with that? Okay. Okay. And-
Yeah, we work with,
Okay.
Is there any ability, since we're on the cars, to use electric cars or hybrid?
haven't explored electric or a hybrid. You know, I would have some concerns given the demand. We put a tremendous amount of equipment into those cars. They're running mobile video recording servers in there. They're running radars. They're running extra solenoids for gun release locks. There's a lot of equipment in there that I'd have to really explore that to be comfortable to think that we could have a unit that would function. Right. Yeah, it's something we could certainly look at. Yeah.
On the capital, and I think that maybe more, in past budgets, I kind of look at the capital going out 3 or 4 years and say, all right, they put a plug figure in for something or whatever, but I think we're more rubber meets the road right now when it comes to looking at this 5-year capital plan, just because of what, other initiatives will be going on in all likelihood. And so when you look at your 5 years, including the HVAC and so on and so forth, what you have in here, and you don't have a lot, I mean, use of force training and so on. I mean, are your items in there sort of, hard and fast have to do, or, at some point, maybe on the 5-year capital, we need to sort of prioritize, what's a wish list, what's wants and needs versus whatever. I mean, when you look at this right now, what you have in there, Mark, is it all, absolutely must-do expenditure?
Well, we know with the HVAC system, that's going to be a must because we just keep pouring.
So we should get
Money
going
into it.
on that, review of that contract at some point, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's in there for 2021.
I don't know,
so.
in terms of trying to reduce the number, trying to see if there's a way to do that for less than 250.
The preliminary information we're getting on that is, honestly, that's really on the low side. Like, that's literally just doing the rooftop units. That's not even entertaining creating a new zone system and any new ductwork or refinements for balancing. We're hearing some pretty scary numbers if we wanted to even entertain that. I mean, north of $500,000 if we wanted to entertain.
And going to a zone system, that may not be what you need to look at. I mean, that's just getting some more electronics, and that is more costly. Right now, there's probably multiple units that created the zone system. It may not be perfectly zoned by room, but it works. It's zoned by unit. Right, so replace the rooftops, solves that problem without additional zoning, I would think. And a question I have on the reduction of a car, are we just pushing something down the road that's gonna haunt us later?
We have to catch up next year for the next one.
Right, so here we are, kind of maybe what Ann's thinking, like, don't do something just to make the budget look right, so it doesn't get pushed down the road.
This is not, I think earlier on when I got here, we did that. So you make adjustments from year to year. This is how the vehicle is going. I mean, it's
Don't wanna
something,
push stuff like that.
Chief and I had that discussion, it's something that we may have to add over next year, depending on how these vehicles play out. But every year, there's always some improvements. As we shared with you last year, our company's about that.
But, again, you're only the first person to speak, so I'm sort of, making this one of my mantras for the day, and that is on the capital spending. I think we should really look at those numbers starting now as hard as we look at the annual budget, because it's, yeah, and it's going to play into, we should try to really put a sharp pencil to everything we can because of the other capital initiatives. So, anyway, you don't have that much in there. Capital for this year. Okay, well, that's, yeah, that's. Okay, okay.
concerns, and we moved that around
Right.
and figured it out.
Okay.
I mean, the issue that we have, just generally the issue that we have on Bob's issue is that we're the only village entity that does 5 and 10-year projections. So what we should really be asking is for our other village counterparts to do the same thing so that we can look at it as a whole. So that's really what, the chief's budget is very tight.
Yeah. Agreed.
Chief, I just had this is more something, in the budget tab, there's the department metrics.
Yes.
And I've been getting my ear chewed off by a lot of people over the past month or two about, and it's sort of, I don't know if this is necessarily that, but a lot of ticketing, and a lot of the businesses in Elm Street, Lincoln Avenue.
Yeah.
And then we got an email just recently on that same point. In the department metrics, it shows ordinance citations up by 58%. That seems, is there more violations, or is there just more of a desire by the department to answer outstanding problems?
So, yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So, two of those increases, one, you mentioned the ordinance increases. A big driver of that, if we were to break those numbers down, is for enforcement of leaf blowers. We really have stepped that up quite a bit. That's why that's the big number there in 18. Those numbers they're always a year in the rears. So for next year, you're likely going to see the similar type of number for 19, as we did a lot of leaf blower education and enforcement of that. That's where a lot of those numbers are coming from. With respect to, the parking enforcement, I'm sure, as council is aware, we've had an adjustment to the village parking program that we've rolled out. We did a significant amount of messaging and education with that. Then there, has to be an element of enforcement with it. Having said that, I mean, just as you've gotten feedback, we get feedback too, as far as what's going on, and we're continuing to look at it. We're continuing to see if there's things that we need to adjust or make changes to. Staff we have a meeting this week on it to take a look at it, actually. Yeah.
One thing that I brought to Chief Rob's attention was, 7, 8 months ago, I took a trip to Hinsdale at a business meeting downtown. In a hurry, parked in a short-term parking zone. And when I came back to my car 2 hours later, on my window, shit, I got a ticket, right? And there was a very nice, gee, we've noticed that you parked in a spot that wasn't for the time that you spent here. And we've also noticed by your license plate that you've never had a violation before. So we'd just like to remind you that when you shop in downtown Hinsdale, please be sure to select an appropriate spot and blah, 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 blah. It was like a nice warning, right? And. Well, since it. Well, no, but the point is that, when you were talking about your computer systems and all this, there should be something that allows our service officers to go out there and not have to ticket, at least initially. I mean, sure, if all of a sudden you see that this license plate is offended 5 times, then you nail them, but it's becoming a source of friction and discontent among the residents. I'm not saying that enforcing the law isn't important, Chief. All I'm saying is that the sense that I've been hearing, and I hear a lot on this, that the sense is from the people in this town is heavy-handed and doesn't attend to some of the other situations that are going on around. And we just have to be careful about that, because I know it's not intended to be punitive, but at the same time, we're starting to get emails now. It's not just next door Winnetka where people are up there carping. I mean, I go into Starbucks, I hear it, I go into pizza, I hear it, and there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way to get in compliance. I'll be the first to admit, I came to you guys and said, the merchant's telling me that you're not enforcing merchant parking in the wrong places, right? I mean, when we went to the meetings, yeah, that's what we heard. Enforce. Get those employees
And there were some trustees over the years that were hammering you guys for not writing enough tickets, to be honest, so.
And I'm not,
It's kind of like a catch-22. I mean,
we just need a better system, I think. You know, the technology is there. We just need to, I'd rather see 20 grand in technology to make sure we can do something like Hinsdale does. Because it was actually a pleasant experience to get a warning.
So we did, and we actually did start using warnings in late this summer. You know, when we implement the second part of our ticketing enhancement here, the system's going to be able to do a better job of being able to track that. You know, when we were handwriting the warnings this summer, we really didn't have a good way of tracking who was getting, you know, efficient way of who was getting warnings. With this new system, I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to do just that and do a better job of or accurately to be able to quickly find out somebody's history as far as checking a license plate for when somebody may have gotten a warning or a ticket or whatnot. Correct. Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
And your Hinsdale experience makes sense. One time issue, maybe twice it happens, but maybe some of these people with emails right now are habitual users.
They are.
Right, so they're getting one or two warnings, they're still gonna get the ticket on the third or fourth. I mean,
it should be able to say, the system says you were warned.
Yeah, I agree, and there's some equity, because to be honest with you, and I'm not pleading my case, but both my wife and I have been ticketed for similar situations where it would have been appropriate to have a warning, oh, by the way, you're parked 5 feet away from the curb, because my wife doesn't park very well. But, you know,
Would have been scraping the
but
rim.
instead, you know, instead she goes and gets her nails done, and she comes out and she's got a ticket from parking too far away from the curb. You know, I mean, and those sort, and I'm not pleading my case, I'm just saying, that's the sort of thing that sends a bad message to the community. And yes, I know I don't put license plates on my car, I'll pay those tickets.
You know,
I've chosen to rebel. We didn't even call you after we beat you up. So, but since Jack opened the door to it, I mean,
well,
what's your license plate number, by the way, Jack?
I actually am sort of,
Yeah, I
parked
parked
out front.
illegally today.
All the mayor culpas are going.
I mean,
Well, I parked legally, I'm just worried that I might get something for being more than 2
When you
hours.
walked in, your first question, am I gonna get ticketed?
not to take more time, but what's the, I saw an issue with an employee parking to go shopping, he got a ticket.
As a realtor.
Right.
Oh, that was,
How do you
yeah,
track
yeah.
that? And that's a tough one, right? Well, you also have to understand that your life is a lot of times.
yeah, and you know, I'm having those direct conversations with people too. I mean, I get phone calls, and I hear exactly the same thing that you guys are hearing, and you know, we want to have a system that's going to work. We don't want to be so dogmatic and say that, you know, this is it, and you know, we have to live with this. If there's something we can do to adjust it and make it an improvement to it, then, you know, I'm certainly flexible and want to be able to do that. There's always that balance between education and enforcement, and it's always there.
I never hear a word about the police being bad in any way other than recently on the parking. That's the only thing I've ever heard. Otherwise, it's all been, they're heroes and they're great.
Well, wasn't
So
there?
it's just one of those, it's a sensitive point with the village. Now I'm going down to check my car.
It hasn't gotten towed, has it?
Good point, that's about it.
You don't want us to have a study session on this one, Rob.
I thought that we were down a man or a position, and that's why we weren't ticketing so much. And so I think that people got used to parking illegally and overly extended, and now we're enforcing it, and so there's like a recalibration going on for people. That's what I thought.
Well, we did have vacancy on one of our full-time CSOs, but we've tried to be creative and make up for that, where we've had, other patrol officers who have stepped up and handled some of those duties, and, that's been able to offset that.
Okay, let's keep it moving. Chief, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good budget, thanks.
Thank you.
I will not mention parking tickets,
Unless it's by a hydrant.
and I'm glad I'm going
Chris moving his car.
90 minutes. I'm glad I'm going second, based on trustee Dearborn's comment and digging in as we go through this, so that's all good. Good morning. With me today, I have Deputy Chief Ripka and Matt Timberberg. Oh, there you are. He's right behind me. They did a significant amount of work on this budget, and for that, I thank them. So our org chart hasn't really changed a whole lot either. What's interesting, over the last 2 years, we've hired 6 new firefighter paramedics, which is a lot for our organization, 25%. The reality is that's really a good mix for succession planning and for the future as more and more people retire. But right now, I think we're fairly stable at this point. We also added an additional inspector, which I'll talk about in a little bit, for our contracts. Statistically speaking, we're pretty much 2,200 every year. We're pretty steadfast. 2 interesting things. Good intent calls have gone up a little bit. I think a lot of that has to do with auto aid calls and natural gas calls. But the good thing is our false alarms have gone down for a 5th year in a row, and I attribute that to a much more robust Fire Prevention Bureau. Response times. Response times are really good. We pay a lot of attention to them, and our firefighters take a lot of pride in our response times, both turnout and actual response time. So it's a 2-component process that we look at on a weekly basis. Accomplishments. Spent a lot of time working with community development on code adoption, and I thank council for their support on that. That was a big deal for us. The Winnetka Music Fest is a big deal in Winnetka, and what you may not know is we do a lot of prep time beforehand. This is a tabletop we do to prepare for just about any type of emergency process, and we take safety obviously very seriously, and we spend a lot of time on that. Our brand new ambulance. It'll be here in about 4 weeks. We're excited to get that into service, hopefully the first week in December. We spend a lot of time teaching our acting officers and our officers on incident command process. That's a blue card process. It's a great program for succession planning, and we do it on a regular basis. Night drills we hold twice a year with multiple companies from Wilmette and our surrounding neighbors. The bottom right picture is active threat training in New Trier East High School. We spend a lot of time with our police department, and we have a very active program on that, keeping everyone trained and up to date on active threats. So our budget, kind of consistent with what you're hearing. We're up at 6.4 million, 6.38, increase of 3.9%, mainly due to personnel cost and pension. But if you compare us to the 2019 total fire department budget, we're actually less than 1% of the total budgets from last year. So we're trying to stay consistent and trying to stay flat in our budget process. So, some good news. Your fire department does generate some revenue. $1.1 million is estimated for next year. That's 17% of our fire department's operating budget. Majority of that comes from user fees, Kenilworth, unincorporated Cook County. Our ambulance collection does well. I'll talk a little bit about that. Our radio alarm network as we implemented in 2010. And then our fire prevention bureau contracts are now at $50,000, which covers much more than the additional part-time inspector we added on to assist us with the contracts. Hello. All right, we're good. So goals. One of the goals this year, in the past we've had a CAN pre-plan program. A pre-plan program is a program where we put data into a database that we could bring out to the field, such as on construction, utility locations, special needs of the building, basement access, all those type of things. And we've had purchase a CAN program. And then you pay an annual fee. This year we're trying something different. We're using our in-house experts as well as some assistance from Wilmette Fire to develop our own in-house program. There won't be any cost to it, and basically we're taking all the information collected from the fire inspections and placing them into this program that will be accessible through the cloud and then in the field, and zero cost for once on an annual maintenance fee. So we're excited about that. We also have 3 lists to update this year. We have 2 promotional lists. They both expire for lieutenants and captains in September of 2020, and then we have a new hiring list we need to update. We actually almost went through the entire hiring list for the first time. Like I said, we hired 6 new people, which is a big deal for a department of our size. And then, under capital, we have some expense in there for our training tower. One of the things we try to do in being maybe creative and innovative category is to develop a co-op program for our neighbors to say, if you'd like to use our tower a little more frequently, we're looking for some money to help us maintain the tower. So we got those feelers out there. We're hoping some of our neighbors, such as Northfield, Wilmette, and Glencoe, will buy into the program, and that will assist us in maintaining the tower into the future. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the issues with the tower. And then ambulance fees. So we collect over $200,000 a year in ambulance fees. A majority of that comes from Medicaid and private pay. We use a company called Andres. They charge us 6% because medical billing is very complicated. It's very difficult to do in-house. So in order for us to reduce that maintenance fee or that service fee for the ambulance billing service, we don't have enough volume. We're just too small. So we're going to join about 15 departments and an RFP to go out for bid for ambulance services, and I'm anticipating that collection fee will be reduced to 3 or 4% by the time we're done, based upon the volume of a regional approach to ambulance billing. And as you can see, our fees are probably a little low compared to our neighboring areas. One of the newer trends is having a flat fee for everything. But this actually kind of works for us, and I think the collections are pretty stable, and we're right about the 70% rate right now, which is actually, doesn't sound great, but it is actually very good in the medical billing world.
Hey, Chief, can you explain that one more time? I'm sorry, this RFP and this change of ambulance service, I don't understand that.
So right now, we use Andres Medical Billing. They charge us 6% to process all our medical billing, and we have 600 and something calls a year.
Okay.
We talk to them because some departments pay 5%, for example, but their volume is 3,000 calls a year. So they're not really willing to budge on the 6% for a volume of our size. But if you take 15 fire departments, now you got 20,000 calls, they're going to fight for that business.
Spearheading that?
That is actually being spearheaded by the Mount Prospect Police, Fire Department.
Is that coming out of Red Center? in some
No,
way? No?
it's just Mount Prospect threw it out to all these departments, and we opted to join in. I'm thinking the RFP will probably go out in January or February next year. So they would, but first of all, it's not their business model, but it's a limited number of departments still. It's only 16 departments where Mount Prospect is reaching out beyond Red Center. Yeah, so you're going to have a much larger pool.
Good, I like that.
So hopefully we'll bring that to you at the beginning of the year, and it'll look promising. As far as capital costs go, we have two projects. The first one is part of Red Center's initiative. They upgraded their alerting system at Red Center. The alerting system is what they use to notify us of a call. Sets off the tones, turns on the lights. They started this 2 years ago. This is the second year. They gave everyone 2 years to do this. We deferred it from last year. What we need to do for our station is upgrade it so it's compliant and with their equipment. Right now, there's a patch cord so they can still tone us out, but it's not going to last forever. So we need to get this done in 2020. And basically, it's kind of a neat system. It will display everything on boards. If there's a TV, it'll stop the TV, put the call on the TV. Probably the most important part of this is that while the dispatcher is still talking to the caller, they can send the information. So we'll see the information actually before it's dispatched, another 10, 12 seconds of response time, which is always critical. So, probably our biggest product, besides our personnel and our skill sets, is getting there as quickly as possible. And I think this is really important, and we're looking forward to the installation. If all goes well, we hope to present it to you in December so we could start the process in January. And then our training tower. So our training tower is in need of repairs. Obviously, it takes a beating when we do our live burns and the weather and all sorts of things. What we have noticed now is all the windows are rotting out from just water, steam, and heat. There's some tuck pointing issues. There's some structural integrity issues with lintels and stairs. I know these pictures are the angles are weird, but we're looking from under the stairs, and it's just all rotting and rusting out. So over a 3-year period, we're hoping to make the upgrades to the tower at a cost of about $120,000. This year, we're asking for $50,000, prioritizing the windows first so we can keep it somewhat airtight, weathertight, and reduce any more impact of the environment on the tower. With that being said, we're hoping to get some commitments from our neighbors to assist us with some of these costs as well, since they like to use our tower on an occasional basis. And like I said, we're going to try to make it available to them a little more frequently if they would like to join our co-op. And based upon the president's request, I kept it very short.
You don't have any major vehicles in there for the next 5 years?
I don't think that's correct. I think in 2025, Tim, do you have the 5-year?
Okay, well, that's not
It's 65, and then the engine is in the following.
okay.
Yeah, so we're kind of quiet for a little bit.
Got it.
But
Yep.
And that's all based, when I got here, we developed a vehicle replacement plan. We completed the first plan this year with the ambulance, and we developed another one, so we're trying to keep everything on track so there are no surprises, and we're not purchasing too many rigs too close together so we can get the most efficient use out of all rigs via their lifetime expectancy.
So your fleet's basically, aside from what's in here, in good shape for the next 5 years?
very proud of the fleet. It's well-maintained by our members, and I think we're in good shape right now.
How's the HVAC on your side of the?
That's a good question.
That's where it's all going.
So we just spent 50,000 last year on it, based upon the capital improvement. The system is not designed most efficiently in that the zones are up and down. So one zone that you set upstairs also impacts the zone downstairs, even though there are two different elevations and stuff. Right. So you could be really warm upstairs and really cold downstairs. So they upgraded all the electronics, the dampers were all replaced, and all the thermostats were intelligent thermostats. I think after, and probably no exaggeration, after about 15 trips and adjustments, I think we're stable right now. The rooftop units are good, but
Are they like 20-plus years?
no, our rooftops are not as old as the police department's rooftops.
Can you keep your doors open to the other side of the building?
Not today, because the apparatus floor is just being finished. Yeah, we'll fume them out, but we do have big fans, that may work. I do agree with the police department's approach that, you know, I think we're okay,
Yeah.
but the systems were, they're challenged in their design, and I think really the only real fix is going full steam ahead and putting in all new systems and correcting the ductwork. It's a bit of a mess, but I think right now, the last 2 months, we seem to be stable now. So I always kept a coat in my office just in case I went to the office next door, but I was able to hang that up.
about the money, yeah, I mean, but I mean, like, they could, but even now, they could say they could take some of that, right? I mean, like, even if it's managed separately, they could ask villages that are funded over X percent to
That's probably why.
municipalities, I mean, they could. I mean, it would be, they're not gonna,
Yeah, no, you're probably gonna go down.
yeah.
All they do is they, oh, what town? Gotta go down the list because that's the consolidation.
But I think either way, you know, we're so afraid to ask villages to pay more tax for village work. And I just think that, you know, after 6 years of holding, you know, on tax increases, like, why not compare this round? You want to have a lot of surplus sitting there, but.
Yeah.
I know, I get it.
Yeah, so when we switched to our, previously didn't, it was like an option of traffic stop and generate, just traffic stop. So now, that covers traffic stops, anytime an officer calls off and says, traffic, you guys know you're telling, that creates a number of people going out of town, different house, watching, I go, check the house, that generates a number. If I am walking Scott Avenue garage, I see somebody else with keys in the car, light them on color, prime, so you that out, that generates a number. So that's why we weren't using that in our metrics in the past, so that's why that number's so higher. Tracking more data now. I actually did tell our people, don't put any time.
Thank you. Talk to the right person.
Or some sort of, or something that's gonna change it, but if you're, I just fear that if you're way far out in front of this thing, you're gonna end up, it's gonna end up being to the detriment of those people that are responsible. Because there's so many irresponsible, factions of, man, what kind of stuff?
Hopefully a brief call. Yeah, I talked to him about it. Last week. Which is easy. Yeah. One of us will get on the elevator. Actually, we can go up and down the stairwell. Yeah. I'll shoot him. He's actually, no, he's the my building downtown.
Really?
Yeah, we had every fire truck from, I mean, even though air fire trucks came in, we had the boat. Pretty cool. Yeah, we had helicopters. It was wild.
So these HVAC issues? No, even.
Did you see the number on the book?
But what the problem I have with, there's no reason we do all ductwork, it's been that way, done that way for 50 years. Live with it.
Throw some dampers in there.
Well, even, yeah, it is what it is. The problem I have with like, when we design stuff, we try to keep as many multiple units and less computerized zones.
It's like getting the
Keep it simple.
a little bit, because it's multiple.
Whatever, 15 years ago,
Perfect.
today it does not work because communications have changed, electronics have changed.
Freon has changed.
Well, that's,
But I agree.
you know, just keep it simple. They've lived with it, because you gotta put a sweater on.
You know, I saw a lot of inflation going on at the school district.
Right.
And you listen to some of the rocket scientists out there that are proposing all this crazy shit. Okay, yeah, we need air conditioning, okay?
You don't need air conditioning. My kids have gone to Greeley, no air conditioning.
I never had air conditioning.
Yeah, but
Ever.
it's 2 blocks from the lake. I mean, they get nice breezes.
How many bad days a year is there?
And
Not that we need it, but I know that.
yeah, mine felt a little dead, but.
I'm so attuned to hearing my voice coming out of the ceiling.
Well, it just feels kind of ridiculous leaning to talk into it if it's not doing anything like that.
Hey, Andy, will you tap yours again? I volumed up a little bit.
Testing.
All right, folks, let's get back down to work.
I don't think they're picking up.
Is this the part where you tell us you're gonna get us a new sound system?
I'm working on it. That's in the village facilities budget, which is in the Public Works
Is
Department.
this when you tell us that our guests that come here at study session will actually be able to hear us? Okay. There are no guests.
That's quite the lead-in. Good morning. So thank you for the opportunity to present the budget for the Public Affairs and Village Manager's Office, both of which are departments within the general fund budget. Public Affairs focuses on village-wide support and council-related initiatives. Village Manager's Office provides for our department-specific operations and staffing, which include divisions for administration, economic development, and human resources. Our staffing and the core services our office provides have been evolving the last several years, so I'm going to sort of divvy things up by those administration, economic development, and HR divisions to help understand where some of the expenses have been moving back and forth in an effort to really align the people with their program expenses. So our budgeted positions are the same as fiscal year 19. The existing change that's going on is we currently have an interim economic development coordinator, which is under contract from a temporary agency, GovHR. As you'll hear from other departments, the cost of our salaries and benefits are increasing slightly due to the cost of living increase. We negotiated our IMRF pension projections, and I also have 4 out of 5 of my staff people still moving through steps. So unlike some departments where we have a majority of people stepped out, I still have people moving through those steps. This is also will be the first year we're carrying the entire cost of our full-time communications manager, Josie, who was hired earlier this year. So though we budgeted for it in 19, we won't experience the full year of expenses on that item. So start out talking about 2019 accomplishments. These are the ones listed in the budget book. I'll be talking a little bit more about some of these in particular that will continue to have an impact into next year. But I think very notably, we celebrated the village's sesquicentennial, shared history and community-focused activities. Unfortunately, Ann Erickson is at a conference today, otherwise would be an additional opportunity to recognize her for all her leadership in this area with Founders Day, the trolley tours, 4th of July, and Pioneer Day. We completed the sergeant and commander promotional processes in the police department. We were part of the support and planning arm and implementation of the Downtown Streetscape Phase 1. The Economic Development Division focused a wide variety of local events that benefit our business districts. Those that we funded this year included the North Shore Art League's Art in the Village and Art Attack, the Winnetka Music Festival, First Fridays, the East Elm Wine Walk, and the Winnetka Youth Organization Festival.
I got one.
We have expanded our presence on social media and launched Smart 911 and Winnetka Alerts along with the police department. We hired Civic Plus to redesign our website. We initiated an RFP for the redevelopment of the village-owned parcel at 93 Green Bay Road, and recently we retained GovHR that will be conducting a compensation and classification study. This is always my favorite slide to present. It's a graphic that's up to date to the end of October with the exception of Dan Creho, our Public Works Maintenance Streets worker who started yesterday with the village. So his picture's not on here yet because we don't have one. But this represents our staff hiring this year. As of the budget preparation, HR had made 30 conditional offers, filled 23 positions through recruitment, and made 2 internal promotions during the calendar year. So that's a tremendous amount of workload going on in all departments. We currently have existing vacancies for the positions of electric crew leader, apprentice line worker, part-time community service officer, and a Public Works Maintenance Sewer Division employee. Those are all active recruitments that are ongoing. So part of HR's work is that we review all the budgeted positions, including projections for retirement and changes with benefits. Significant goals and objectives. This is at a high level. Some of these I'll dive into a little bit more on some of the particular expenses, but you know, part of economic development, I think one of our most significant roles is to be an ombudsman to the business community. That means that we help facilitate information, problem solving, work to improve processes that may be causing people issues, and programming that facilitates our business community. We also have an overall role in our communications division that we're engaging in a continual dialogue with our stakeholders on the village's priorities. We have efforts going in business expansion, attraction, and redevelopment. You know, not only working with our existing businesses, you know, many of whom are, you know, individual boutique businesses, but targeting new businesses and keeping that pipeline strong. The village's human resources also, you know, consumes a tremendous amount of time in our resources. This compensation and classification study that's been something long in the making. It's been over a decade since the village had something like this, and it will really help us strategically going forward. Next year, we'll be doing both entry-level testing for police and fire, so both of those lists expire. We're actually going to be doing police earlier because we have gone through our lists. So those lists over time have shrunk. It is harder to recruit people who want to get on those lists, and then it is harder to get people through the process to, you know, from candidate who tests to hiring. We're also budgeting a significant increase for fire promotional testing. That only occurs every 3 years, but we do hire outside assistants to facilitate that process. And then we anticipate providing continued support to special events, and I've budgeted to accommodate at least 6 significant event sponsorships. So just talking specifically about communications, the website redesign, we anticipate a launch in early Q2 of next year. Civic Plus was hired in September. Josie and I have had our initial project kickoff with them, and they will be on-site doing stakeholder focus groups and feedback later in November. So their work starts to ramp up for both really working on the navigation and the functionality of the site, as well as how it should feel and how it should look. Growth and development of e-news, social media, Smart 911. This is, integrated thinking about which platforms we're using to communicate with people, how we're having a dialogue with them. We're budgeting for and anticipating some special publications. I think the refuse program changes, a lot of that stuff. I mean, there's getting containers and making those program changes, but there's also educating people about those changes and getting their feedback, and that'll be an area that we'll be assisting Public Works in. I think as stormwater, agreements get signed and plans develop, we have a significant part of the obligation to communicate with residents about stormwater. And we're also working on a new resident guide, and that would be both a printed and electronic publication that I think would be a good resource for really welcoming people to the community. And we're also working on our own brand and having consistent stationery, business cards, those type of things that are a nice representation of the village. In the area of economic development, things that I've budgeted for include print and electronic branded materials for targeted expansion efforts. Liz Deschamps, who's our interim person, was just at ICSC week before last, and we developed a nice postcard for her to hand out, and she got very good feedback on that. So I think doing some of those smaller but targeted materials. We'll continue working on sponsored advertising activities, including promotional videos. We talked a little bit about those local events. We're also working on planning for a town hall meeting, place for us to welcome businesses, help answer questions, establish us as a resource. And then we'll continue our participation in support of the Chamber, the merchant groups, and the North Shore Convention and Visitors Bureau. Human resources. And I should have mentioned with both Civic Plus for the website and with the compensation and classification study, I'm carrying forward approximately half of both of those expenditures into 2020. So we'll get a significant, start on work this year and be able to pay about half of those projects. And then the other half will probably be paid in the first half of next year, and then those will wind down. So we anticipate completing that study. We have, ideas and some programming around new hire attraction and also retention of our existing employees. We'll be doing several village-wide training initiatives. We're now required to do anti-harassment training every year. It is something that we have typically done village-wide every 3 years, and we do it with all new hires, but we will have to do something village-wide every year. We'll also be doing workplace incident reporting training and new supervisor training. This year we did reasonable suspicion training, village-wide customer service training, and also some workplace incidents. So every year we take a fresh look at what training is necessary and budget accordingly. We have a wellness committee that's going to be going into its second year. Having a wellness committee is really a requirement of our participation in the Intergovernmental Personnel Benefits Cooperative, but I think it's been very well received, and I'm looking forward to them having more ideas going forward about how we want to encourage wellness in the organization. And then, as mentioned, we do have some significant expenses related to entry-level and promotional testing, but budget has gone down in some other areas with HR with completing both of our collective bargaining agreements. So for years that we're negotiating, my legal expenses go up. They go somewhat corollary down in years we're not negotiating, but then they sort of go up during these testing cycles. So, and I think with the size of our lists and, some of the issues with really getting quality candidates into those processes that, we'll really have to keep an eye on how often we're testing for those items. So this is just a snapshot of the key financials from my budget representing the functional areas we've discussed. What I wanted to call your attention to is the significant decrease in public affairs. I'm good, but I'm not that good. Is that two things, is that the 150th celebration was a one-time expense. So we had not only all of those special events, but an increased fireworks show, and so the contribution that we made to the Park District for that. Also, some of our communication-related items used to be in public affairs. So for example, newsletters, that's a $25,000 a year activity. I've moved that over to the village manager's department-wide fund because that's where our communications manager is budgeted. So things that the communication manager is working on are now budgeted along with where that salary is. So you'll see an increase, but some of that is public affairs moving over to department-wide village manager's office expenses. And then, as I mentioned, we've got the carry-forward costs on the two largest projects. Those affect the village manager's office department-wide fund and also the HR account with the compensation study. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Just on, I don't know where it's spelled out, but we have been getting to the Winnetka Music Festival. Is that in this number?
It is in the public affairs special events. I believe it's the 589 account.
Yep.
So we budget for Music Fest and Public Affairs 589 because that's generally been something the council has approved. So we budget for it, and then Music Fest will come and ask you for those funds. So that's to your discretion. And then I budget for these business district local event sponsorships in the economic development budget. So
So I support them, however, the music festival now is being privatized and they're gonna be charging for it. So it makes me uncomfortable to see village funds subsidizing a private adventure.
And he is coming next Tuesday
Okay.
to talk about it. So we're budgeting capacity. It's up to you as to whether you want to authorize
Yeah.
it.
I also,
50?
It's 25.
and then I would love if we thought about it, I think one of the more dead times of the year in the village is winter. And, you know, if we could do something to get people outside, I know in other places in Copenhagen, people go outside in the winter and they drink on the street and there's lots of.
you're asking me to plan drinking.
No, but I mean, it's like to get people out onto the streets and, you know, you
Yeah.
dress up in your warm coat and you come out. So maybe there's
Yeah.
some money that could be, you know, redirected towards a seasonal, getting people out of their homes at a different time. Music Fest is awesome. It's a great thing. It's established. It's also a very fun time, you know, everyone knows. But the winter here is just really heavy and difficult.
So
I
we're-
would encourage us to think creatively, maybe move funds around, but I guess that's a future discussion.
So we do have some things in the works. So we're working on an expanded tree lighting celebration, going to be doing some expanded things with that and looking at some additional programming in part over in the West Elm area that sort of streetscape's going to be done. Here are ways that the village can help program that and also to give them ideas about additional things they may want to do in the future. So for this winter, we're going to be focused here because we have this new space, and I think we also want to feature
Yeah,
how the business district can be integrated in that. But definitely that's a fair point, is I think making sure that it's not just holiday focused, that it's Winnetka is a place to go year round. And you're right, June, July, people know to come here for events. So I'd like to see us, at least for the next year or two, take a little more forward step in doing some of that programming and facilitate it. And then it's a question of then how it rolls forward. Do the merchants get more involved? Is it something the chamber's going to be involved in? But we're taking more of a leadership role this year.
And Ann brings up a good point on the Music Fest. And maybe when we had the discussion, I know there's money we provide to the Music Fest. And then maybe have the actual cost of what the extra police and fire costs are.
We have that accounted.
That'll be presented maybe at the same time.
I
Good point.
can let you know what our expenses were for the previous year.
Yeah.
I think we have the previous 2 years as
Right,
well.
It's a lot more than just that
Right.
number.
Because
So-
that becomes our contribution.
Exactly, and because of the change in their process this year and the way they're rolling it out, it's a touch point with council that you're not asking to actually approve it because your budget isn't approved yet. So they would have to come back in January if you agree to fund it with a resolution to approve at that point. But this is an opportunity for Scott to show up, present what they're doing, make his case for the money, and you can decide how you want to go
And now
forward.
that it is privatized, I'd like to see more reporting documents on the entire Music Fest. But is there any money being made, or is it totally,
They actually took a loss last year.
right, I'd like to see those numbers, I think.
Yeah.
Megan, on the couple questions, on Liz, on the economic development, I'm just looking at page 57. What's your assumption for the economic coordinator position for the year? And are the numbers here assuming a full-time, fully loaded position, including pension contributions, et cetera? How does this work with interim and?
So when we're paying a contractual employee through this type of arrangement, I cannot use a salary account. So I have to use, for this year, I have to use other budgeted funds that I have available in order to cover those expenses. So what I think is that we budgeted for a full-time position, and I think the full-time position is the right one for the village. I think we needed a bit of time to get someone in the seat, ensure things were covered before we started thinking about the recruitment. So I think the interim has done well in that regard, and I think that Liz will be willing to work through that process when we go out to recruit, and then she would be, welcome to participate if she wants to. But I think we do I think we get back to a full-time position. What I think may happen in the meantime, and Rob and I probably need to discuss a bit further, is that we can convert her from being a contractual employee to our own part-time employee, and that will save us expenses. And then I can use the salary accounts that are available to pay those part-time expenses, and I think we would still have plenty of capacity to hire a full-time person next year. So the position is fully loaded. I think it's step C of the anticipated salary schedule with benefits, with pension, with FICA. It's got everything in there, but I can't technically use, like this year, I can't use the full-time person's salary account to pay the current expenses.
So if she stayed on as interim for the entire year, what would that do to this number? The fully loaded number for that position, including pension and healthcare and blah, blah, blah.
It would probably be well under that number. I think if we converted it to, she's our employee, so I'm not paying an overhead expense to the temp agency, I think we would be well under.
So if you fill this position in March, let's say, you'll probably come under this number to some extent.
Right, but if we ended up going out and recruiting and hiring someone very senior into that role, I feel that we would have enough capacity to do that, to both pay for our part-time temporary person and to go out and hire the full-time person. I mean,
Do you have a time frame on that? Or no?
we haven't discussed what the time frame is. The agreement with, that we currently have goes through November, and I'd like to think about getting us into that person being our employee rather than a contractor due to the savings.
I see.
And then it also takes off the pressure because we're in a month-to-month arrangement. It creates some certainty for us.
Right.
That then, but I think Q1 next year is probably a reasonable timeframe.
Q1 next
I
year.
would agree.
Okay. And then, I was a little confused on the issue, and I'm just looking on the line item, basically to legal policy consultation. Is that relating to the union negotiating? What is that relating to? I don't.
So the legal money in the HR fund is related more to our handbook policies and individual personnel issues that we may run into during the year. So if I have a disciplinary matter that I need consultation on, or if we have new legislation like cannabis, or like this new anti-harassment training requirement, we go to our labor attorney, ask those questions, and that's where this money would be allocated, so.
Why the increase from $6,000 to $33,000 or whatever? Well, in line item, whatever, the legal services on page 62,
That's 5,000.
it was,
That's the fire promotional training of 30,000. So the budget in that line item for legal services, is 2020 budget was 46,000,
yeah.
and the 2019 budget was 13,000.
Right.
So that increase mostly driven by the fire promotional testing.
Testing.
Yeah, we've gone out and gotten an early quote on the fire promotional testing, and it's much more expensive than our last experience. So we know we're going to have to go out and talk to a couple different vendors in terms of refining that price, but the early price that we got has gone up significantly since the last time that we tested.
You know, Megan, we've been talking about the Celebrate Winnetka platform and all that stuff. I know because we don't even know if it's going to go anywhere completely. I mean, you got wiggle room to join in on that play if it really starts to materialize as something that could could work for the community?
So what I ended up doing, and, sort of with this in mind, but knowing that we also want to leave open opportunities for other businesses and other programs to come through, is that I slightly
guys.
decreased our advertising budget. So our advertising budget, I believe, went from 23 to 20. But the advertising money is not as of much interest to people, and we're really evaluating where we're spending that advertising money. But with special events, I had previously budgeted 10, and then I budgeted 15, and we're completely spending all that. So this year I budgeted more in the special event sponsorship line item. So I think between the advertising and the special event is where, if that starts to take off, I have some capacity, because those are both things that every year we look at every item, and also that people come and make an ask for those. So, as those asks start coming in, we evaluate those, and, it may be that, we've funded Hubbard Woods First Fridays for a couple years now, and last year they asked for $8,000, and one of the questions I have for them is, well, what other sponsorship money are you getting, not just coming to the village and asking for $8,000 every year? Maybe $8,000 the first year or two is good seed money, right? But then you use that to build some of your own capacity and go get other funds so that the village can support other initiatives. So I think there's plenty of capacity based on experience of people coming and asking and having those conversations.
Okay, and kind of on a parallel line, and this is something I'd love to hear from you guys on, is this North Shore Convention and
Visitors
Visitor
Bureau?
Only because I was on council when they decided to do that. And there was always this sort of trepidation that what are we going to get out of it? And now I see it's kind of embedded in the annual budget as an automatic. And it looks like it's on page
59.
59. We're up to a $15,000 allocation for,
So that's not just
What do we get?
convention, so wrapped into that account is chamber, support of the chamber, so our dues, our platinum
oh, I
membership.
thought there was another line item for that somewhere. I'm just talking,
It starts on 58.
yeah, actually, the chamber was a separate line item as far as that membership.
So the Convention and Visitors Bureau membership, I think, is 6,300.
69.
69. And then we also
Publications
do,
is another 3,200. and then-
right.
and then
But that's
promotion.
advertising that we individually evaluate each year. So that's based on, what campaigns they're running, what promotions we have, what asks for advertising we get. So what I would say is they have been, I would say, very helpful to us in terms of opportunities. They do regular events that I think are very well done, and they have a lot of that activity that is the region, that is not just Winnetka, but I think we have things that draw from the region, and so I think there's a benefit to that.
So because really the only deliverable I see is that book that comes in the mail once a year.
They're doing a lot more than that, and they also,
There's more out there than just the book.
yeah, and there's more that individual businesses can do, and what, part of what our role is that if we don't belong, no one in the business community can belong. So the village basically has to pave the way that if any local businesses want to take advantage of those events or opportunities, like participate in Restaurant Month, they can't unless the village is a member. So it's sort of, it's like the chamber, is that the village has this, sort of obligation, dues paying, but it paves the way for other things that we can then leverage or help people participate in.
Okay.
I believe North Shore Convention and Visitors Bureau committed to having at least a couple of events in
And they do.
Winnetka a year.
Yeah.
That was part of our
I just went to
ongoing
one
membership
They do?
commit. They do
this
two.
summer, yeah.
Yeah, they did. They're supposed to do 2 a
Oh, you
year.
mean business-to-business sort of event?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Megan, I'm sorry, part of my notes, I was running legal. The line item before that, Rob and I we've been talking about it. The fire promotional testing, the $30,000. Explain that, and the cycle of that expense doesn't look like it's annual.
No, so it's every 3 years, and we're obligated to do it. We don't necessarily have to do it with an outside vendor, but it is a complicated and fairly cumbersome process because of all the statutory requirements. What happens, and why it's kind of a big number compared to what you might see, police is a little bit different. So police only has technical promotional testing for sergeants. The other ones with police only occurs when a vacancy occurs. You don't have to keep a list. But in fire, you have to keep a list for both lieutenants and captains. And so it's actually two different ranks that test, and we do get some benefit by them testing at the same time. There is some efficiency created by that. In this last contract I negotiated with them, we're going to alter the timing of the list to make it a little more, I think the timing of the year will help us administratively, and it will help them in terms of what they'd like to see happen. But we have gone to outside vendors for all of our list-related testing now, because we have to make sure to meet all of the letters of the law, because if you had a claim that you had not done that, it would be very expensive. So we've had good experience with the vendors in the past. Like I said, the number surprised me a little bit, and we're going to work on it. We're going to go get a couple quotes from a couple different vendors, but we wanted to at least get a sense of, if we do both of them together and do it at this time, what number should we be looking at? But with also having entry-level testing for both police and fire and lieutenant and captain testing, it's a very heavy load.
That is a regular cycle. Yes. And the vendors indemnify us, right?
Yes.
And that's the key thing. I was actually talking about this with the chief a few minutes ago. I've defended these cases, and they are massively expensive. So frankly, for the indemnification, it's worth it.
Anything else for Megan?
Just a quick question that I may have asked this before, and I should remember. Do we have an anonymous complaint reporting service, whether it's a hotline or?
We do not.
Okay. Is it something with the new Illinois laws? It's something we can look into for
Sure.
Yeah.
It might be a service that's available that we're just not taking advantage of, given the number of different
Yeah.
vendors that we have.
And given our head count, like one of the big ones, Navix, there's a bunch of them, but it would probably be about $1,500 a year.
Okay. No, we can certainly take a look.
Yeah.
This sounds like a real cheap insurance policy.
It's where it's the number one way that most of my clients actually get workplace complaints is through anonymous reporting hotlines, so.
That makes sense. All right. Thank you.
It's a great idea. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Good job.
Okay,
Okay, Tim,
that would be tab 5,
tab 5.
finance.
Okay, so for Finance Department, just kicking off with our org chart, we made a slight change. We reduced the number of utility billing staff. We had 1.5 full-time positions in this area. Now we're going down to part-time in this area. This was due to efficiencies gained from utilizing Locksbox payment services and outsourcing utility bill printing. So the reduction was as a result of a retirement and just basically a position left unfilled. In terms of our overview, our department's dedicated to providing exceptional services to both external and internal customers. We apply modern financial management practices to ensure that the village is able to deliver services effectively and efficiently. Big goal of ours is so we have the customer service component, but also the safeguard component. So safeguarding village financial and technological assets, promote innovative IT practices, achieve continued financial strength, provide accurate financial information in a timely manner, maintain maximum transparency, provide financial direction and support to the other departments, and our total 2020 budget is $1.5 million, a little over that, which is down 2.56%. Accomplishments for the current year, winning the GFOA, that's the Government Finance Officers Association Awards for the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award, and the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. So one's for the budget, one's for the audit. So I always joke, in the Finance Department, we're never in the actual year we're in. We're either looking ahead to the next year for half the year, or the other half we're looking back to the previous year. But these awards are for the actual documents that show, the village is adhering to certain standards of transparency and thoroughness within these documents. We completed the audit on schedule with an unqualified audit opinion and a clean management letter, which means there were no internal control deficiencies, material weaknesses identified. Reduced utility billing staffing by not filling a vacancy created by retirement. Implemented smartphone meter reading. and in progress, expected to be completed by the year end. We're working with our software vendor, New World, to complete a payroll process review, and then also a risk management insurance analysis. For next year, prepare and manage the 2021 annual budget and 2019 annual audit. Again, those are two major projects for the Finance Department. Continue to safeguard those village financial and technological assets. Responsibly manage the village's investment and treasury. Provide financial analysis to the utility funds to identify sustained funding for long-term infrastructure needs. And continue to win the GFOA budget and audit awards. And fully implement cyber phishing awareness software and training platform. This is a major concern in the Finance Department, safeguarding our technological assets. We've seen a large increase over the past year or two in ransomware attacks, specifically targeting village entities. So this is, trying to make sure that our systems are, we believe that they're very thorough and up to speed, but just to test them and make sure that that is the case. Just some key points on the Finance Department budget. Overall budget's down 2.56%, reduction of the one full-time equivalent, and also the contingency, the village-wide budget contingency is housed within the Finance Department budget. So that's being reduced from $300,000 to $200,000 this year. Oh, is that?
Questions for Tim? Well, what I have is reducing the contingency. What factors go into making that decision?
So some of that is just having settled contracts for the union negotiations. Last year, they weren't settled. Now they're settled, so that's more of a known factor. So we've been pretty good about not having to tap into the contingency over the last few years, and having those settled contracts and that track record, we felt it was appropriate to tweak it down a little bit.
Great.
Yeah, so with $100,000 out of contingency, your overall budget would be affected too, right?
Yes, but the 2.56 was net of the contingency, so that did not include the contingency. Not cherry picking and, taking credit for that, so.
Not that you would think of something like
You know,
that. Okay, well, thank you, Tim.
You're
Appreciate it.
welcome.
Good job. All right, next up is Public Works. Steve, you looks like you got a little work ahead of you. What I'd like to suggest, tab 9. Yep. It's probably 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. A lot of heavy lifting here. Your report, you give a general overview and then you get into the individual.
Yeah, I've got 6 funds to go through.
Right.
And I go through them one at a time. So I don't know if you want to stop at each point and ask questions on the individual fund,
We
or...
have a resident or two that might be interested in sharing their thoughts with us. And so what I was thinking is, I haven't looked at your PowerPoint yet, Steve, but, I mean, do you do a big overview and then drill down, or?
Yeah, so I'll go through the Public Works General Fund first in entirety, and then each individual sub-fund after that. So if there are
Where's a
maybe...
good time to stop, Rob, as far as public comment?
I would say let Steve do the overview, and then we'll take public comment.
Okay.
That's fine.
Does that sound okay?
Okay.
Sounds good.
We don't have anybody yet.
We have one.
Elijah's here.
So thank you. Still morning, good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to go through the Public Works funds with you. We have a multifaceted mission, almost entirely relating to providing outward-facing public services, including refuse collection and disposal, roadway and right-of-way maintenance, stormwater drainage, sanitary sewers, maintenance of many of our public facilities, such as Village Hall, train stations, the post office property. We have internal customers through fleet services, and then we do permitting work through engineering and forestry. We also implement a significant portion of the village's capital improvement program. And before I get in too far, I do want to thank particularly Assistant Director Jim Bernal
who did a lot of the work preparing this budget and this presentation, and also our former Public Works analyst, Matt Havlick, who left us in August for another position, but he did a lot of the prep work for the budget. I appreciate your work on this, and if you like the budget, thank them. If you don't, talk to me. So to provide these public services, the Public Works Department is funded from a variety of buckets. A significant amount of our funding comes from the general fund, which is approximately 53% funded by tax revenue. The rest is permits and alternative revenue sources. Some of our capital improvements comes from the Illinois Motor Fuel Tax Fund. There's a portion of the motor fuel tax receipts gets distributed back to municipalities based on a per capita basis. The sanitary sewer, refuse, and stormwater fund are all business enterprise funds, meaning that they are supported by user fees rather than tax revenues, and then interest on cash balances. And then the fleet services are funded from other user departments. There's an annual charge based on a 3-year rolling average of the total cost of repairs by each department that funds the expenses in that area. To do that work, we have 32 and a half full-time staff. We share an administrative assistant with the Water and Electric Department. Our total salaries and benefits this year are up just under 2%, or about $48,000. The bulk of that is the COLA increase and an increase to the IMRF rates. We've had some staff turnover, so we've had some longer-term employees move on and replaced by newer employees that are lower in the step scale. Some accomplishments, we completed the annual street and sidewalk rehabilitation programs. We have a heavy presence in some of our community events for traffic control and crowd control, including the music festival and our 2 main parades. We completed removal and replacement of brick pavers in various locations of the commercial district. That's in addition to the streetscape project. There are some of the older concrete pavers that get replaced out with clay pavers each year. We continued enhancing and maintaining our urban forest, engineering permit review, and code enforcement. We completed phase 1 of the tuck pointing repairs to the cenotaph. If you haven't been out there recently, the eastern portion of that has been re-tuck pointed. We are almost complete with the roof replacement on the salt storage building. I think they're going to wrap that up tomorrow. We did our roadway testing and sign inventory, which I'll talk about in a moment, and we've essentially completed, with the exception of placement of furniture and planting materials and some punch list work, the downtown streetscape project, phase number 1 on Chestnut and Spruce Streets. Our 2020 goals and objectives include maintaining public properties, including street sidewalks and alleys, so our street rehabilitation and sidewalk and curb replacement, implement additional alternative de-icing rather than strictly using road salt to reduce chloride runoff to our local waterways. The forestry and landscaping, including the landscape maintenance contract of all the village parking lots and rights-of-way and public properties. Some equipment replacement that I'll talk about, and phase 2 of the downtown streetscape project, which will consist of Elm Street from Green Bay Road to Birch Street. Our total expenditures on the operating side are up 0.4%, which is essentially a flat budget given the operating environment we're in. And then we have about $2.3 million in capital expenses. Before I go into details on the street program and the capital expenses, and is this a good place to stop, or do you want me to continue?
We only got a couple slides
Yeah,
left
okay.
on the first tranche anyway.
Yeah.
Why don't we keep rolling?
Okay, so our street rehabilitation program is budgeted in 2020 for 1.93 million. That's up from our typical expense. The reason for that is you recall that we took bids on some of the projects that were related to the water main, and then we rejected those bids because the cost came in, due to the bidding environment, the cost came in unacceptable. So we took those projects and rebudgeted them into the 2020. We completed early this year our 5-year program where we evaluate the roadways. We have a specialty contractor come in. They have a specially equipped mobile van that takes video of the streets, measures the street conditions, takes deflection data on the street conditions. We also gathered sign inventory data with that. We use that data with a proprietary software program that they provide to calculate an overall condition index for the village's roadways and an individual condition index for each street. And then using that software, we've identified a number of different rehabilitation strategies, and we can optimize the expense where you implement a rehabilitation strategy at the right time to keep the pavement rating as steady as we can for the village, and that helps us identify what the proper capital spend each year is for our street program. It's similar to if you had a house with wood siding. There are some activities that actually have to take place every few years. You have to scrape and paint some areas. Every maybe 10 or 15 years, you have to do something a little bit more intensive, and then at some point the wood's going to rot out, and you have to do full replacement. And so, when you target investments at the right time, you can maintain the life of that infrastructure for the most optimal cost. There are some complications with that. We have to move some of the pieces around to coordinate with other capital projects. Particularly, we want to take advantage of the opportunity to repave a street only once in coordination with Brian Keyes' water main projects. Sometimes the roads can be affected by multiple new building construction projects, and that might change our anticipated timeline for a street. And then unusual or severe weather patterns can play havoc with that. We saw that 3 or 4 years ago when we had that polar vortex winter, and then we were moving a lot of streets up that we didn't anticipate because of surface deterioration from all the freeze thaw. We take our cost projections based on average actual costs for our rehabilitation projects. We've got an extensive database going back 15 or 20 years for unit prices for actual Winnetka bidding data, and we use those averages and then an inflation factor based on published construction cost indices. So this slide shows our rehabilitation program for 2020. You'll see that there are some streets that are in what we call the Tree Street area. Those are roadways we've kind of been watching and holding on while we're developing the stormwater improvements. Several of those streets have deteriorated to the point where we have to do some work on them. So what we're anticipating is like a 2-inch surface grind and a resurfacing that'll buy us some time on those, but ultimately there'll be a full reconstruct of several of those streets as the large stormwater conveyance projects come to fruition. This is a listing. You'll see that some of these streets are outlined in red. Those are projects where we're bundling with Brian Keyes' water main improvements, so that we're carrying the roadway rehabilitation and restoration of those projects, and the water fund is carrying the water main and service replacement. Brian will go into a little more detail on the specifics of those water projects, but our roadway costs are estimated at about 1.93, and the remainder is related to water main costs. So we'll have actually a a total spend on roadway replacement of a little over $3 million. But that'll be split between the general fund and the water fund. We have some other capital projects to the tune of $360,000. We're replacing one of our sidewalk tractors, a 2002 model. That is going to assist us in maintaining the new streetscape improvements. We're looking at a vehicle that's a little bit more reliable, a little more maneuverable, that has attachments that are going to be less potentially damaging to the improvements that we're putting in. We have our annual sidewalk and curb replacement program for $150,000, and then we're replacing one additional leaf vacuum for our curbside leaf pickup. That's the general fund portion of Public Works in a nutshell. If there's any questions on this point, then maybe it's a good stop.
Well, Elijah, I'd like to bring you up to address council and share your thoughts and concerns with us.
Do you want me to? You've seen me a lot, but I hope that by looking at some of the correspondence that I've sent you regarding the Green Bay Trail and caucus results, that it's important to the residents of this community. It has overwhelming support, as you've noticed from the caucus surveys, and they recommend supporting and improving that. So I'm one person, but there are a lot of people behind what I have to say. I could be specific, and I will for a second to illustrate a point. If you walk on the Green Bay Trail and look at the underpasses, you are either in almost a dark tunnel or surrounded by peeling paint and a pretty unsightly view of Winnetka from residents' standpoint or from visitors' standpoint. I don't know whether the painting of the underpass of the bridges was included in the contract. I know it wasn't originally. I was hoping that it might be amended to be put in the contract so that federal dollars could help just spruce it up, such as was spruced up on Scott Avenue this summer in anticipation of Green Bay Trail Day. Another thing that I think is obvious on the trail is proliferation of our favorite plant, the buckthorn. It is all over the place, and it will be expensive to eradicate, but there are some areas that one could cut it down, and you have to herbicide it immediately in order to get rid of it. But this illustrates what my main point is that, okay, who's going to do that? Is it the Park District or is it the village? And we know that that the Green Bay Trail is a village's property and that you have an agreement with the Park District to take care of the Green Bay Trail. But the Park District looks at it of the paved area and a little margin, and the rest of it, they don't do anything. The forester does some work on the trees, but they're in pretty bad shape. So what do? Do you respond to every person who comes up and says, oh, you ought to remove this, you ought to paint that, you ought to put these signs up? I'm recommending that you put in your budget and that it be explicitly stated, not just in a discretionary funds, to have some expert, knowledgeable people write a report about how the trail can be maximized from all sorts of standpoints, in terms of signage, certainly in terms of invasive species and natural spaces, making it a welcome bridge to Winnetka. If you ever go down there, especially on a beautiful day, it is jammed. And it's a very valuable asset, as I'm sure you all know, but it's fallen into neglect. So that's what I recommend that you do. I think the results will be reasonable, measured. You can look at the report and say, this is what we want to do. This makes sense to do at this time. And look at the options. Because obviously there are all sorts of things you could do. You could pave the whole damn thing and put up shops along the way. I don't think that's what you'd want to do, but there are wonderful trails around the country, and I think you could get some really expert advice and it'd be worth your money. I don't know if you have any questions, or I made my statement.
Well, do we have a plan on
Do
this?
you have a budget item?
There is not a specific budget item, but there has been discussions leading up to this. So a couple of points. The executive director of the Park District and I have talked about this, and we have conceptually agreed to split the cost of a study or a design look at the Green Bay Trail. We, at this point, think it would make sense to append that to our to-be-selected consultant for the comprehensive plan as a side engagement. And we are hoping to bring that comp plan consultant approval to you next Tuesday. Once things in place, we would sit down with them and ask for a side engagement for the Green Bay Trail, get a cost, work that out with the Park District to share. We do have money within our budget that could account for it, or that could pay for it, pending council's approval. So there's a couple of contingency accounts that could fund it, depending upon what the costs come back like. So we've had discussions, but it hasn't yet ripened to a full-blown, we don't have a proposal to put a budget number to yet. But we do plan on working that in the next couple of months.
Do you have a sense, Rob, of what a project like that would cost?
I do not. I would like to leverage the consultant to, since they're getting a bucket of work from Winnetka, to try to add this in at a reasonable cost.
Yeah, I like the idea of putting it in that bucket.
Right. Right.
I also think it is important to tie it into the comprehensive plan, because it's the thing that kind of cuts across the entire village.
The comp plan will have a major component with respect to transportation, whether that is pedestrian, bikes, obviously cars and buses and everything like that. So it does tie into the comp
Yeah.
plan process fairly nicely.
And I know we have a bike master plan, or at least the Park District.
Park District does.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that something that would be looked at in the context of
Yes.
the comp plan as
Yeah,
well?
it would be. In talking to the Park District, I know that they budget about $15,000 a year for basically maintenance of the trail.
Yeah.
Another year out, they have about $114,000 that they haven't completely approved it yet, but they're slotting for maintenance of the trail, which I would think would be primarily the paving aspects.
Yes, paving is
But
better.
I know that there's drainage issues down there. There's certainly aesthetic issues. And then there's, of course, the question of invasives and how you buffer that. If you remove that, how do you deal with buffering to the adjoining homes? So there's a number of questions to resolve, and I'm sure you all have other ideas about it as well.
So it's a split responsibility,
We own it, they maintain it.
but
Yeah.
but as Elijah's saying, they only maintain the pavement. Because every morning when I'm at the train station, I look at the
Sort of.
crab apples, the
Yeah,
trees along
right.
the train station.
Right.
That if they were healthy, they'd be wonderful,
Steve.
because it would.
Do we have maintenance money? I'm sorry, go
Make
ahead.
it look better.
Yeah.
So it seems to divided responsibility means nobody's really responsible for maintaining anything other than the pavement, which would get to the Buckthorn and the rest of the.
You know what I heard, Jack, and this is, you know, you start to hear some of this urban myth that gets embedded into policy, that, oh, the park district is responsible for horizontal surfaces, and the village is responsible for any non-horizontal surfaces. I mean, that's what I've heard, you know, when I was talking to Mickey and John about this. It's like, what the hell kind of policy is that, you know? And is it the second it turns up the hill? I mean, and that's what they're defending, is saying, oh no, if it's dead level. And Steve, you know, you probably live with this.
Yeah, so basically the park district takes care of the trail, and they take care of anything that they kind of mow on the verges of the trail. The Union Pacific Railroad has the fence and anything up against the fence,
Right.
and then going up from the drainage ditch up to the top of the slope, that's village property, and that's the village's to maintain. The
So-
park district doesn't do any of that.
Which is interesting.
Although they do the ramps. So there's a ramp up by Tower in Old Green Bay, the one at Pine Street, the entrance at Ash and Maple. Park District takes care of those, and the gates and the ramps.
So it really isn't the horizontal surfaces because of the swamp that exists beyond the margin that they cut is really village responsibility theoretically. I mean, because there's no definition.
District property, but they don't want to cut.
Well, because it's a slough. I mean,
Which I'm in favor, I mean, it's actually, when you're down there, it's cool. I mean, there's.
well, it's not cool when you're getting chewed up by mosquitoes and attacked by.
You probably shouldn't spend so much time sitting there.
No, I'm moving. I'm moving.
Who's responsible for the remnants of the old electric line?
Yeah, I mean,
It's the village.
Is it? Okay.
But see, I love all this, I mean, that's.
Yeah, it's cool.
My history is that railroad.
I agree.
So, and all of that stuff along with, so, to me, the way it is now, I like it, because it's not removing any more of the historical aspect that I grew up with. So.
right, and I think it's interesting because I've heard a lot of people talking about the trail, and I use it 4 or 5 times a week, and run into a lot of people in town who use it 4 or 5 times a week or more. Eli, you're right. I mean, during the summer, on a beautiful day, it's packed down there. It really is one of those community resources that nobody talks about, but everybody really enjoys. And personally, I do agree that if we're going to make a commitment to the trail, that we should embed it in the budget, not just refer to it as, well, there's some contingency to cover it when it comes around. I mean, we should really have a line item for, you know, planning, at least for this year, planning for Green Bay Trail improvements. So at least we have something embedded, and then we can come back, obviously, talk about it in a study session, right? And kind of start to draw some lines around what makes sense and what doesn't, but at least have something in the budget, because otherwise, it's easy to forget something like this, although I don't think, Elijah's gonna let us forget about this anytime soon, but the reality of it is, if it's in there, it becomes part of your universe, right? It becomes one of your objectives for the year, and it becomes a little bit more clearly defined. I understand what you're saying, Rob. I know the money's in there somewhere in the,
There's a couple places,
but, you know, why not just, you know, take some of that money and allocate it now and stick it on a line item?
Would 15 be a reasonable amount to designate for a side project if we're going 50/50? I mean,
probably, I mean.
I would think
we-
so. I mean, that's a lot to just think about it.
Right. I mean, we want to have a more detailed discussion with the proposed consultant about how much of their plan has actually incorporated the bike trail.
Yeah.
And other designated routes in the village. So I don't want to pay for it twice.
Right.
So I'm going to vet that out a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then come back.
Come
But
back
if
at
you
us.
all want a line item, that can be added, that can certainly be added, we can find the right place for it.
I'd like to
But,
see that.
but again,
Future councils, the line items there are present.
Right. That's a good point too, John, yeah.
I just, and just in terms of these kinds of resources, I think you're all right, Elijah. It's really good that you're bringing this up for us, but, if you look at the High Line in New York, or if you look at the 303, even if you look at the city's, bike path, private philanthropists have stepped up and helped to fund those projects a lot. And so some kind of thought about it, having a private-public partnership ability here. I know that there's Friends of the Trail, and they raise some money, but not on this scale. But I do think that it is an opportunity for someone who really cares about it in the village to also make a statement about the importance of it. Because to get it to looking like, it's obviously not as big as the 303 or the High Line, but to get it to look like something like that, which it could be, would require private dollars that, would amplify what
And
the
here's the
village is
thing,
saying.
Ann, you bring up a really good point, because without a plan, without being able to at least create a vision, it's hard to go out and get those dollars, much like the boathouse, right?
Right.
That you have to almost seed this with some intellect so that people can grasp onto it. And the problem we had is when this first came to me, a couple years ago, we started talking about this. My suggestion is to join forces with the Glencoe group and create a Winnetka chapter, so that a lot of people from Winnetka have been donating to the Friends of the Trail, right? And then when push came to shove, and I'm not going to vilify them, but the reality of it is that when the people who were involved started to have conversations with them about a Winnetka chapter, or somehow bifurcating the money that has been dedicated so people can direct it to one or the other, it was pushback. And it was all about, well, the accounting and this and that. I mean, there's a lot of operational reasons why they couldn't do it. But the point is that Winnetka dollars are flowing into Glencoe for them to utilize on their section of the trail, and we have nothing. But part of the problem is that private citizens and the village did create a vision there that they could then go out and fundraise around. So we tried the join forces and kumbaya. Kind of sounds like the
Cannabis.
yeah, definitely. Huh. Well, we'll be talking about water soon, but that's a whole nother thing. But maybe it's time for us to just take matters into our old hands and get this rolling by, and Andy, I think 15 grand is a reasonable amount. I doubt if we'll even use all that. We can always strong arm the consultant once we engage them and make sure that they understand how important it is to us, and maybe we get a better deal on it.
You know what the park districts, how much they spend on their part of maintaining?
I believe it was about $15,000 a year in maintenance, but they're looking at a repave the next year out at about $115,000. Yeah, so they have an annual maintenance budget. I had an email from the director who said this is what they have, but I don't have all the detail.
So, but on that length of a trail with that much of a public resource, $15,000 is.
It's probably mostly patching and mowing would be my guess.
Yeah, it's mowing.
It's not capital. So it's not improvement money. It's basically maintaining what's there.
Because there's no vision, right?
Well,
No.
because I'm thinking with the two different groups in charge of it, the village can't go down and say, okay, this is what we want to do with this. We'll manage this asset of the village. Because the park district, because the responsibility for maintaining it is, park district goes down and does the real visibles, the day-to-day stuff, the stuff you run on, the pavement. That's all park district, so they get that part. For the village, we get all the expensive, less easy to maintain stuff of getting rid of buckthorn, trying to maintain it. Our part of the path is way longer than Glencoe's, and for us to turn our path into what Glencoe did with theirs is a much huger project.
Well, I think we would have some pretty lively debate on the vision, because I'm not sure whether Glencoe's vision for the trail is Winnetka's vision for the trail. Elijah might argue that it is, but there's others in this room that might argue that maybe it isn't.
No,
But those are policy conversations we have to have. The interesting thing about the Park District is they were more than willing to create a bikeway program solely on village-owned streets. So, I mean, there's precedence for it. It's not that it's a bad thing or anything, it just is what it is, right? And I personally, the good news is I know from a board perspective, the Park District is interested in this too, and I think they're gonna be having similar conversations so that we can come together and work on this. And I think the stormwater issues have opened up the door for a lot of those sort of conversations, and we're gonna benefit from them. But I think the first step is, let's just get a plan, get a vision, start the community conversation, and see where it goes.
Chris, do you agree with aligning it with the comp plan? Or as part of
Oh,
that
I
part?
think, yeah, I mean, if you got a consultant already geared up, why would we go out and RFP
Exactly,
and
exactly.
waste
Okay.
time for all that when we
Okay.
can just tack it on
So-
to something that
So
matters?
the product, the end result, will provide context for public-private partnerships, grant funding, right? Because there's a lot more funding for that sort of thing than I've seen for more other traditional infrastructure projects. So there's some opportunities to raise funding, and then, of course, whatever association may want to come about and take advantage of the plan and fundraise off of that.
Rails to Trails has always got opportunities out there, and, you know, we're already there, and it's just a matter of being to identify and making a plea that just because we were Rails to Trails before Rails to Trails was fashionable,
Right.
doesn't mean we shouldn't be excluded from accessing those funds now.
Who's responsible for painting the bridges? That's the village.
That's a good point too,
And
John.
that could be an easy, low-hanging fruit. I'm not sure how cheap that is or how expensive, but,
You know what'd be really cool would be to get,
$1,000 a side. I
That's
got a
it?
quote on
you know, so. that's
1,
the
2,
real
3, 4,
obvious-
5,
Maybe
6,
you'll
7.
have a different quality, but
Just get the New Trier students to go out there and do, honestly, and do murals down there. They did a
Oh,
cool
there's some
job
murals.
down over
Right. Yeah.
at the school, and
Right.
then it would have a community effect to it. How'd you feel about that?
Well, I've thought of that myself, but haven't pursued it. There are 2 points, though, I'd like to make, is it's more than a bike trail. And a study can determine how much more than a bike trail it is. I have 3 points, actually. The second point is that the Friends of the Green Bay Trail is working in Glencoe now because they started there. Its vision includes the entire trail, and there isn't any reason that it, as a supporter of the trail, can include work on the trail in Winnetka. And whether that's the right vehicle for funds to get to Winnetka or not, I'm not sure, but we can talk about that. But I think maybe your study could address that. And I forgot the third point, because I inserted it in the second.
So going back to the bridges, is there any kind of plan on when that would get cleaned and painted, or is there a time frame, or is it just like a chaotic thing?
It's an ad hoc thing, we don't have,
There's coordination with the railroad, right, flaggers, right.
So Steve, is there money in the budget here for maintenance, landscaping, whatever, of the trail? In the annual, I mean, is there an annual amount that you've dedicated?
There's not a separate dedicated amount, so we've got money for tree removal, replacement, and trimming, and our village forester spends some of that on the trail on an ad hoc basis. If there is individual things that come up during the year, that's part of our drainage maintenance or landscape maintenance. We do periodically bring in contract labor to assist our folks with litter pickup. That's typically a spring expense, but it's not spelled out as a line item, Green Bay Trail
So this
litter
isn't
pickup.
the level of
No,
a project every year
no,
where there's a dedicated responsibility, if you will?
no.
And why do we do litter pickup instead of the parking space?
Because most of the litter goes up into the slope.
Well, and they do have an annual event where people go out and pick up litter along the trail. I mean, it's usually in the spring. And, you know, it's a volunteer sort of event and a feel-good thing, but it does happen without expense.
I think that hasn't happened in the last couple of years.
Really?
My scout troop used to do,
Yeah.
18 used to do the Winnetka train station, but I don't think they do that right now.
Mm-hmm.
So to just kind of wrap this up, I guess, if we're trying to wrap. So November, we have a comp plan proposal.
Right.
And in that discussion, or
It
following
won't,
that
it will not be
discussion-
ready for Tuesday, but it'll be following up from
Following
that.
up with that discussion, there would be a conversation with a side
Yes.
project on this. In
Right.
the meantime, you're gonna be talking to the Park District
Yeah, already have.
about
Yeah.
coming together based on this conversation too. And maybe we can get something, this project going early in the year.
It's fair.
And is that what you think?
It's fair.
Okay.
Would I be able to make my third point now?
Sure.
Quick.
We're running behind schedule.
This isn't a natural landscape. So a lot of trails try to get a completely natural landscape because it used to be a trail and it was flat as it is north and south of here. So in the review, you need to take that into account. It doesn't mean, it seems to me, that you let just Buckthorn take over, that there are ways that you can make it naturally attractive. Important thing is, and I think you've seen it at the train station, it takes stewardship. There was a beautiful garden there 3 years ago that the Guild put in, and they probably put in, and it was gorgeous, but it didn't get taken care of, and it's all clean as lace now, and the trees are. It takes expensive stewardship in terms of money and time. Just like any asset.
That's where a nice public-private initiative comes into play.
I agree. Thanks, Eli.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thanks.
So, great. Okay. Now, back to Steve. Any comments or questions on the general public works budget? I have a few questions, but I'll let everybody else go first. Bob, you usually end up cleaning up about 4 or 5 of mine anyway.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you, on your capital, your 5-year capital, is this fully loaded capital plan in your opinion?
Yeah, so with the projects that we, excuse me, are aware of at this time, it's sufficient for our needs. We have a dedicated fleet replacement schedule, and so we've loaded in some replacements based on that dedicated schedule. Those costs are based on budgetary estimates from equipment dealers for current day replacement, and they're inflated out based on what we know today. Each year, when we look at our equipment, we make decisions on whether, does this need to be replaced this year? Can we push it off another year? We look at the balance of the overall capital program. You'll see that a couple of pieces of equipment there are sizable expenditures. But we look at those each year and make an annual determination. Do we need to do this now, or is this something that can be deferred a year? Or maybe something we're looking at, boy, we got that out there 3 years, and this year was hard on it, we might have to move that up to 2 years. But we review that each year. And I think that between our funding our street and sidewalk maintenance plus equipment, we've got funding in there for whenever Metra gets around to finalizing their design for the Hubbard Woods train station. We've got some facility funding in there. So I think it's complete. I wouldn't anticipate, unless we go maybe into a new direction, for example, on the Green Bay Trail, if there's a capital investment, I don't have anything in there for that. So there might be some drop-ins, but based on what we know now, I think it's complete.
You got 30 grand in for new sidewalk construction?
Yes.
New sidewalk?
Yes.
Where are we going with that?
That is there as a placeholder. We talked about a project on Locust, south of Winnetka. Now, 30,000 isn't going to cover that full expense. I know that we've gotten some comments on the lack of sidewalks in the area south by Crow Island School. So we've got some funding in that could be used for that as those projects come up. We've got a policy that relies pretty heavy on public involvement, and so there's a lot of discussion. In some of those areas, it's going to be hard to get consensus to put sidewalk in from the adjacent property
Yep.
owners.
Well, there's always going to be contention with that,
Right.
both ways. I just wanted to make sure, because I know that was something that Penny was thinking about, and wanted to make sure that you were aligned at least with her thought process, that, you know, that policy of putting sidewalks in when the opportunities pop up, that we have something available for that.
Yeah, and there'll be some significant opportunities in that particular neighborhood when stormwater conveyance proceeds, because we'll have a lot of those streets completely torn up.
Gotcha. And I'm just trying to get faces with positions here. Who's the superintendent of operations?
That's Steve Oth,
Okay.
and he does hands-on supervision for the 4 operating supervisors.
Okay. I just, sometimes, it'd be easy to say Steve, Jim, Bull, you know, Bill, but sometimes I just
Right.
don't know who's who anymore. This is probably, I don't know if this is the time to ask this question or not, but I noticed that Jim's time gets allocated amongst the funds. And Tim, maybe this is more of a you question. Your time sometimes gets allocated amongst the funds. I mean, or at least your compensation.
Salary, right.
Right? Other people do too. How do you determine that allocation?
We try and estimate what their workload is, how much time they're actually spending doing work related to that project. So how much of Steve's time, you know, would be dedicated, or whoever's time is dedicated towards, you know, as an example, sanitary versus public works, or in like Brian's department between water and electric, there's a lot of times 50-50 splits. So it just, we try and estimate the workload, and that's where they get plugged in.
Yeah, I just, the only reason why I bring it up, either of you, is because I know that there's going to be sensitivity on this refuse thing.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, and so I want to make sure that we're comfortable that all the costs that we're loading in and thus charging for are defensible, and it isn't just an arbitrary assignment of 10%, 15%, or somehow gets divvied up that way.
I think for the refuse, I think that's one of the more cut and dry ones, where it's actually the refuse collectors that are in there.
Oh, no, I know,
Yeah.
but I'm just talking about the allocated overhead component. Is there going to be sensitivity to the overall cost now that it's a fee, and especially when we go to this tiered system of pay-as-you-throw or modified pay-as-you-throw, or whatever you want to call it, that, you know, there's going to be scrutiny, and I just want to make sure that it's defensible and fair. So, that's all I had.
Okay. Moving on to the motor fuel tax fund, as I mentioned, this is funded by the state of Illinois motor fuel tax. By village policy, these funds have been designated to pay for capital improvements. By state law, there are limits to what you can expend motor fuel tax funds for. Essentially, they have to be transportation related. There are some operating type programs that are permissible use of MFT funds, but the village has for many, many years viewed this as a capital replacement fund. Our revenue in this fund will increase slightly thanks to the additional 19 cents per gallon motor fuel tax that the state implemented this calendar year. In 2019, the village's share of engineering and construction of the Cherry and Oak Street Bridge projects is being funded through motor fuel tax. We'll have some additional closeout expenses that'll carry over into next year's. We pay up front for engineering and get reimbursed by the state. We're paying 20% of the engineering cost. The construction is paid up front by the state, and when they get around to billing us, we have to reimburse them our 20%. It's unlikely that that'll all be invoiced by the state this year. In 2020, we have a project to reconstruct the parking lot at Spruce Street. There's some a little bit of a complication with that in that we actually restrict parking in that lot at certain times of day. To use motor fuel tax funds on a parking lot, it has to be 100% free, 100% public, 100% of the time. So we're probably going to wind up shifting that project to the general fund and shifting an equivalent amount of street rehabilitation from our annual street rehabilitation program to the MFT fund, so that both funds will, the expenses will match up to what's in the budget. We also have a project to complete engineering of improvements on Willow Road between Hibbard Road and Forest Way. We want to do some intersection channelization, signalize the intersection of Willow and Forest Way, improve the operation at Willow and Hibbard, and coordinate the construction timing of that with our stormwater improvements on the Forest Preserve and at Duke Childs Field. We anticipate that likely the construction of that would be funded by the Illinois Department of Transportation as part of a possible jurisdictional transfer where we would take over jurisdiction of that road and the Illinois DOT would fund reconstruction of that improvement. And as I mentioned, the state increased fuel tax gives us approximately $240,000 a year of additional revenue. Any questions on the motor fuel tax fund?
Steve, one thing that's always kind of confused me a little bit, a lot of things do, but
Especially with the muni budget.
are the projects that can be financed within this fund versus other projects that, I mean, you just mentioned that we can move one from the other to the other and this and that. I mean, this is largely state subsidized project revenue. Are there opportunities to do more? I mean, we have a fund that is, it's overfunded, I guess, about looking at the fund balance here. Is there opportunity for us to do more using MFT money versus general fund money?
There are. One of the things that you'll see, the Elm Street Bridge is going to need rehabilitation. That was just given an overlay in 1999, so we're at the 20-year design life of that overlay. And based on the condition of the deck at that time, the future is probably going to be a deck replacement. And so one of the things that we've used the MFT fund for is basically a sinking fund to build up reserves to pay for these expensive bridge projects. We have 6 bridges that are partially or completely ours. We have used and can continue to use motor fuel tax funds for street resurfacing. There are more restrictions on the contracting portion of the MFT than there are on the village's contracting. We've got some hoops to jump through in terms of bidding process and the way that the contract documents have to be written and how much MBE, DBE is used. So there's some complications with it, but there are some opportunities for funding there. But it's not unlimited.
But, okay, so, again, as we're staring down the barrel of some pretty big projects over the next several years, is there any way to take projects, and out of one pocket to the other, I get that, but, we might end up using general fund money for other projects going on. Is there any way to take some projects or justify it or have it approved out of general fund financing into motor fuel tax financing?
There is. The most likely would be street rehabilitation.
Right. Is there a way to get a sense of a dollar amount that we might be able to do over the next several years?
Yeah, we could look at the amounts that we have programmed out. We'll probably have to keep Brian's water improvements separate, because that would be a contracting complication. So we would still probably want to do the street portion of wherever we're bundling with the water main with general fund revenue. But we can look at, especially the impact of the additional revenue from the increase in the motor fuel tax, and see what that would buy us in terms of additional general fund capital capacity.
And would that come out of the 5-year capital plan, mainly out of street reconstruction?
Yeah, that would be the most likely. We tried to do that with parking lots, unaware of this little nuance of 100% free 100% of the time with no permit restrictions. So that's going to limit our ability to spend that funding on parking lots. But street rehabilitation would be the simplest way to do that.
I guess I'm not suggesting that we would forego projects that we have to do.
Correct.
In the event, but this seems to be to me to be one fund balance that's not, that we can probably draw down lower than some others.
Yeah, it doesn't have a reserve
Right.
requirement like
So,
some of the enterprise funds do.
keeping $2.5 million in there or whatever, maybe we can use some of that.
Yeah.
Is the money that goes into this fund regular and predictable, or is it discretionary?
Well, it's from the state, so it's always discretionary, but
It can be late.
it's fairly predictable. We were, when they were without a budget, they were months and months and months behind on that. Now they're catching up on it, but to the extent that Springfield is predictable and functional, it's predictable, because it's a formula.
If you don't spend
No.
the money, they take it out of the budget and say, okay, well, you didn't use that money, so
No,
we're going
no.
to reallocate this money someplace else.
No, it's a transfer to the village, and it goes, we have to keep it sort of
It's our piece of the pie,
accountingly
yeah.
separate, but it's given back to the villages, and there's just restrictions on what you can spend it for. It has to be
You can see some
transportation
vulnerability,
related.
some variability in the fuel tax rate depending upon the economy. The economy's strong now, so we haven't seen that, but if there's less driving, less fuel consumption, then the MFT receipts are lowered by correlation.
Well, and
I've seen
Pritzker
that
just
happen.
jacked up the rate.
Yeah, so
that
it's an
we're
additional-
actually going to get more money.
It's
Right.
$240,000
Right,
more
yeah.
now.
So
So generally, it's pretty
5 to 10
reliable.
years, I mean, you might be able to get $1 million to $2 million
Yeah.
out of
Yes.
the general fund.
Are you thinking of snagging it for stormwater
Yeah.
potentially? Okay,
Freeing up capacity.
Yeah.
that makes sense.
That's why I'm wondering how predictable it is and how, because if you don't want to figure, well, 5 years from now, we'll have this money coming in, if it's going to get screwed up in some way, or it's going to get reallocated by the state. But if it's fairly predictable, then
I think it has been.
Yeah, the allocation process is predictable. You could see a situation where there's an anti-tax settlement and enough people get to the legislature and they cut that, and then the revenue goes down. But the allocation is per capita, and it's a typically pretty consistent formula. I forget what the percentage of the total revenue goes back to municipalities, but then that's just distributed per capita. So that piece of it's predictable.
is it hard to use these funds? I mean, I know there are a lot more rules to it, but is there a way that could go, I don't want to do the paperwork, I don't want to do the whatever, this is hard money to use, or hard money to spend, given the village's circumstances?
No, they've got some pretty streamlined procedures for straightforward street resurfacing. If you're getting into some of the, we used it, for example, when we did the traffic signals, because they've got pretty straightforward procedures for some of that. If we were to try to get inventive and combine it with other contracts, like maybe we'd pay for street replacement as part of a storm sewer improvement, that part would get complicated. But if it's a standalone street resurfacing program, it's not particularly difficult.
And the balance builds if it's not spent?
That's right.
I mean, if nothing else, I don't know if you can do any revisions or think about this, and then, as we go about approving this budget and so on. But if there was a way you thought you could do it, I mean, there is at year end $2.5 million after 2020 projects in there. I mean, so you don't have to, we wouldn't be saying we're going to take $5 million, of anticipated receipts. I mean, there is, there's funding there.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we would, it would be difficult to do this year because of the street mix and the number where water, but if we looked at 21 and beyond,
21
yeah.
through
Right.
24,
Yep.
25.
Yep.
And, so maybe the general fund goes down from $1.6 million to $1.45 million, and whatever you
Right.
think is right.
Yep.
Okay, in the interest of time, if you guys have beat that dead horse
Yeah.
enough.
That's a good horse, though.
That was a good horse. There's a
horse,
good-
Chris.
There's a little fun.
It's a good horse.
I got a quick one. You talked about Elm Street Bridge as part of that. Fuel tax.
Yes,
The modifications are part of the street scape.
yes.
Would that be part of that money, or is that additions are extra, or do we pay for those? How does that work?
Unclear, and the only reason I say unclear is because what we would plan to do in terms of the actual geometric modifications, I'm not sure, there's design standards that come with that MFT money, and I'm not sure how that's gonna interplay, so we have to be, I guess, a little careful on how we structure federal or state participation in that, but obviously the idea would be to do all of those things as part of one project, right?
Okay, so we can either have Steve plow through the sanitary sewer fund and then break for lunch, or we can break for lunch and come back to
Let's
this.
do sewer first.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we all need to be attentive and responsible. I've got a 12 o'clock conference call.
Well, we talk about sewers a lot, so be fairly up to date.
Okay, so the Public Works Department maintains almost 247,000 lineal feet of sanitary sewer main, over 1,100 manholes, one sanitary lift station at the bottom of the Sheridan Road ravines. Part of that is annual video and cleaning programs to keep the sewers clean and functioning. We assist property owners doing residential inspections to prevent sewer backups, what property owners can do to take care of their own castle, as it were. We locate and eliminate cross connections that allow sanitary sewer cross-contamination to storm sewers. This year, to date, we've partnered with 7 homeowners to install anti-backup devices or overhead sewer as part of our cooperative program that sunsets this year, by the way. And we do annual trenchless structural lining. In 2020, we have identified capital repairs that I'll talk about in a moment, and essentially continue the annual cleaning and video inspection program. We do root intrusion foaming. There's a foam that goes in that basically kills the roots and prevents them from causing blockage in certain areas. We've got a lot of, not a lot, but a number of sanitary sewers that are in rear yard easements and things like that that are more susceptible to root intrusion. And we'll continue to locate and eliminate cross connections as we identify them with our televising and cleaning operations. Financial summary, operating-wise, we anticipate a 5% rate increase this year. Our overall operating expenses are projected to decrease slightly, primarily in services and supplies, because of the discontinuation of the anti-backflow program. We had been funding that to the tune of about $105,000 a year, and we've eliminated that, so that's what accounts for the decrease there. That decrease has allowed us to increase our focus on capital improvements on a pay-as-you-go basis. Recall last year we talked about the possibility of seeking some funding from the Illinois EPA. We are backing away from that. This slide shows the status of our investigations and repairs. The blue highlighted areas are areas where the MWRD has said those are high priorities areas for you to address. Repairs and inspections are complete in those areas. The sections of sewer that are highlighted in red have been lined over the past 10 years. So you can see a significant portion of our system has been addressed. In 2018, we did video, dyed water, and smoke testing and manhole inspections in these two areas colored yellow and purple. That evaluation identified about $3.3 million of capital repairs that are necessary. We've completed, excuse me, we've completed the immediate priority repairs, and we will be directing $400,000 each of the next 3 years to address the high and medium priority repairs. That allows us to essentially build that capital in with minimal rate increases. We've programmed 5% this year and then 2.5% carrying forward, and to keep the fund balance relatively steady. The anticipated fund balance at the end of 2019 is about $1.6 million. At the end of 2024 is about $1.6 million. And that includes, you'll see here, 3 years of capital funding to address those high and medium priority repair areas. And then in year 4, there is one area of town that is yet to be smoke tested and video inspected to that level of detail. That's basically the north central and northwest area north of Tower Road. That is the area where we had the least amount of sanitary sewer backups, so that's kind of the last area we have to go through. We've budgeted an investigation of that area in 2023 and then tentatively programmed in some whatever critical repairs might be identified as part of that study in 2024. But again, we're able to do all of that without dipping into any kind of external financing and do that as a pay-as-you-go. So you see the cash balances are projected to be steady, and the repairs identified, we have $1.2 million in repair expenses programmed into this fund. Our sewer rates compare favorably with North Shore communities. This is a slide showing Winnetka's proposed rate compared with a number of our neighbors, and you'll see we're in the middle, a little more expensive than some, a little less expensive than others. And that's sewers in a nutshell.
Could you go back one? Just hit.
This one?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're wondering why some of the towns have really heavy sewer increases, that's what happens when you defer capital improvements and you have to issue a lot of debt, and then you have to pay that debt back. It goes into your sewer rates, and so.
Or they haven't woken up yet.
Yeah,
and
so.
they're still working on old rates, right?
Yeah. So, well, no,
The low ones.
Deerfield has they have actually an area where they have to maintain their own treatment plant.
Oh.
And so they did some capital improvements there. Wilmette, we're familiar, they've just issued bonds in the last year or two for some of their sanitary program. And those expenses hit the rates when you're paying back those.
Well, I guess the point I'm.
So cheap. They're not doing the maintenance?
No, they're doing the maintenance, but a significant portion of Lake Forest is much newer than, all of western Lake Forest is way newer than almost all of Winnetka.
They haven't woken up yet.
Maybe they haven't
Much,
started
yeah.
doing their repairs.
Possibly.
That's why they need cannabis.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Okay.
I have one question just to, on this, the backflow prevention thing.
Yes.
How has that been subscribed? Have we spent all the money? Is there still demand for it? I mean, I noticed you got $3,500. Is this like one last one that's laying out there? or-
So I carried that just in case somebody is partway through if they're partway through the process, I don't want to cut them off and say, sorry, you're out of luck. So we've partnered with 7 this year. I didn't put a slide in this year, but I've had it in the past. That's a significant drop-off. There was a lot of pent-up demand after the 2011 flood and when the village defunded the program for a few years. So that pent-up demand has essentially washed through And we had some interest, but a lot less this year than we have. It's been declining for the past 2 years. So.
What are you thinking, Andy?
Yeah,
I mean,
wanted to make sure we had that option.
yeah,
For the residents, until we had things fixed.
I mean, is there still a line of people looking to take advantage of this? I mean, I don't.
There hasn't been. It's a tool that we use particularly in the immediate aftermath of a heavy rain event where there's a lot of flooding, because it's something that people can do. One of the things that we have working for us is tear downs, because anything that's new built has overhead sewer on it. And so that's the other thing that's been helping us over the years, as some of the older housing stock is being torn down, we're getting rid of some of those gravity sewer connections.
I remember when I first came on, there was a bunch of residents that were concerned, and that's when we decided to jack it up, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just want to make sure that we, that come the spring rains, we don't end up with 30 people here saying, why did you stop the program?
Yeah, and we're a 5-inch rainstorm away from having those questions, so,
Yeah.
I mean, but
Okay.
that is one of the things that's allowing us to focus on the capital repairs without having to take on debt.
Are you
which-
guys, I guess the bottom line is, are you guys comfortable in sunsetting this, knowing that we're not going to get a lot of resident pushback on it?
I can't guarantee that we're not going to get a lot of resident pushback on it, but based on the limited number of applications that we had this year, it's a reasonable approach.
Gotcha.
It's still there we're not taking it out of the village code, so it's still there if the conditions change and the council wants to fund it again.
So if there's a lot of feedback that comes after an event, we can come back to council and you could temporarily reauthorize.
Yeah, the code outlines the program, and it basically says
If you
that,
had to.
it's subject to the council's discretion on funding it.
Do you know how many potential houses there are still have this?
I would be guessing, but it's probably in the 200 to 300 range, maybe, just in terms of age and who would qualify for it. But not all of those homes are in locations that are susceptible to flooding either, so it's probably a smaller percentage than that.
Our risk is pretty low of having people who get screwed up by this program.
Right, right. And look, if we get a glut of applications this year, we just tell people it's not funded this year, and then we communicate with you this time next year, and there's a policy decision to make.
And, I mean, could you process applications, for people that want to get the work done this year, but the reimbursement would happen in the next budget cycle?
Sure. That's a possibility.
That's
I mean, just because the funding isn't there doesn't mean people can't do the work.
Right.
Yeah,
And then put it in the pipeline.
yeah.
As long as we have the flexibility to respond to that. I know there's some passion around that.
Yeah.
So, that was the only thing I had. Anybody else?
Okay.
Sounds good. All right, we'll break for lunch.
What's your schedule? Should we start?
Huh? Whatever you guys want. I'm 2 o'clock.
Tomorrow.
You want to take a half an hour, or what do you want?
What do you want to do? 12:45 is great.
Okay.
I got to answer some emails and take a phone call too, so I'm not even going to respond. Because to come in here, clog this thing up, unprepared,